Okay, members, welcome to the Planning Committee and welcome to members of the public. Jill, would you like to...
Thanks, Chairman. I'll just read out the housekeeping notice. Please note that this meeting is being audio recorded by the Council for subsequent public broadcast. The meeting may also be audio recorded and or filmed for live or subsequent broadcast by members of the public. Please could I remind members and officers to use their microphones when they're speaking. There are no scheduled fire alarm tests. If the alarm goes off, please leave through the emergency exit at the back of the room and assemble at the front of the building by the public toilets. Finally, please could mobile phones be turned off or switch to the silent setting for the duration of the meeting. Thank you. Item 1, apologies. Apologies have been received from Councillor Lepedevin, Councillor Mellor and Councillor McCormack. Item 2, substitute members. I've been advised that Councillor Brooke is substituting for Councillor Lepedevin. Item 3, declarations of interest. Do members have any declarations of interest on the agenda items that you're considering? So I'll record that as none. Thank you. Item 4, minutes. The minutes of the previous meeting are available for the Chairman to sign with your agreement. Members happy that they're an accurate record? Thank you. Item 5, public issues. We have received a number of requests to speak on the items before you, which we'll deal with as and when we get to them. Okay.
Thank you, Jill. We've got a number of items before us this afternoon and a number of speakers for and against. Can I ask that people are respectful of each other and don't barrack anyone during the meeting or afterwards for that matter? First item is the Oaks, who's it's the tree, sorry, tree preservation order. Mr. Turner.
Thank you. Okay, thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, members. The first item this afternoon is the confirmation of a tree preservation order, TPO. That's Tree Preservation Order 1210 2019, land on the southwest side of 8 Paddington Grove in Bournemouth, just off of the Ringwood Road as you go down to Bear Cross. This is the location plan. This is a tree. It is a tree at the rear of the properties there on Paddington Grove. It's a red oak, which is referenced as T1 in the slides, in all of the slides. This is Paddington Grove, and this is Ringwood Road over here. It's an aerial photo. Show you T1, the red oak there, the rear of the properties, and just from a different angle, looking back up towards Ringwood Road, you can see the tree again. This is the tree. This is actually viewed from housing parking area to the rear of 8A to 10 Paddington Grove. And this is the same tree from from the public highway on Paddington Grove, and also once again from Paddington Grove, close to the junction with Ringwood Road there. And again, the tree from a private parking forecourt at St George's Drive, which is just on the other side of Paddington Grove. That's all of the images there. Are there any questions, members? Just to add that the recommendation is to confirm the order as made.
Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chairman. Could the officer just confirm who made the request for the TPO and what was the background for that, please?
In terms of the background, we originally had a request from a local resident for the tree preservation order, and then following a consultation with my colleague Nick Jackson in the tree team in Bournemouth, the request also came from him for a tree preservation order to be made.
Councillor Trent?
Yes, thank you, Chair. On something like a tree preservation order, as I say, I did go to try to look at it, try to ascertain which tree it was. And it was obviously the bigger and bushier of the two trees that I could see from out on the road. And I'm actually wondering whether, if there were permissible works to tidy it up, because I should imagine it shades out one of the bedrooms that, you know, of the house that backs onto it. Would it be possible to, when these things are looked at, to say, but you know, such and such a works would be permissible before the order's put on it? Because otherwise, once the order's put on it, you've got a whole new process for people to have to go through. You know, and then that sort of complicates it, and it might be that a little bit of work done to it would ease some of the objections from people saying, well, this tree, you know, shades me out. So it, you know, because it looked to me as if it needed some pruning so that it doesn't actually impede on the light to the property immediately behind it. But at the same time, it is a significant tree, it's noticeable, and, you know, so it's probably perfectly reasonable to put an order on it. But, you know, I just wonder whether that there's a way of doing it that could sort of, you know, allow a certain amount to go in advance of the order being put on or something.
My understanding is that if we confirm the order today, it's then in place. But Mr. Turner?
Yes, just in answer to that, once the TPO is served, once it's in place, an application can be made for any desired tree work. And an application for tree works can be made on a tree which is subject to a temporary order, and it's the same once the order is confirmed. An application can be submitted at any time for any desired tree work. And I should add that the application is a free service. There's no charge for the submission or assessment of TPO tree work applications, and we will consider any desired tree work and issue a decision in the same way with any sort of application. And there's obviously further details available on the BCP Council website.
Before we go any further, can I bring in Mr. Hearn, who I believe wants to speak in objection?
Sorry. The grounds for objection are simply that the tree doesn't provide sufficient public amenity to warrant an order, nor can it reasonably do so in the future. To explain that point of view, I'd like to quickly refer to central government planning guidance on preservation orders, which essentially states that a tree, that the extent to which it is visible to the public will inform your assessment of its significance, and that it would normally be visible from a public place such as a road or footpath. But importantly, it goes on to say public visibility alone will not be sufficient to warrant an order. The authority is advised to also assess the particular importance of a tree, and it lists a number of characteristics you might take into consideration, such as size and form, future potential, and contribution to the landscape. So I did ask for some photographs to be distributed. Yes. Can we take the view of the main view of the tree? No, these are all, well, the tree officer showed it anyway. There's a view from the main, the only view I think you need to see, no, from outside number 10, that one. For my money, that's the only significant view of the tree from a public vantage point that you need to consider today. And I'd just like to, in line with the government guidance, examine that amenity value and try and quantify it a bit. Firstly, I'd say I've been to the site 7 or 8 times over the last 8 months. I've not seen one pedestrian, so it's certainly a light footfall along there. Secondly, if you're walking downhill, that's from right to left, you wouldn't see it, because by the time you potentially could, you've passed it and you're facing in the wrong direction. Walking back up the hill, the tree just comes into view when you reach number 10A. You get this view, which is the boundary between 10A and 10. Then the view diminishes until you reach that driveway when it's lost. It's a distance of about 10 metres or 4 or 5 seconds walking. So a pedestrian would have to happen to look up, look to their right during that 4 or 5 seconds to appreciate that tree. I did provide quite a selection of other photographs, and I had intended to talk through them, but it's become quite evident I won't do so in the 5 minutes. But I hope you've had a chance to see them. They were meant to be distributed because I think they quite clearly demonstrate how minimal the view is from other vantage points. There you see the red oak. That's this year's growth. It wasn't visible when the order was made and when I assessed the tree in February. I'll skip past the fact that there it is, hidden by a cherry tree. You can't see the oak there. Well, you can just discern it at the back. And then I've showed that's not the oak, that's the cherry. And then I referred to the tree officer's photo there. You can see part of it sandwiched between the ash and the cherry. And that's the view from St George's Drive that the tree officer's report refers to. And that's the same one as the tree officer from a private forecourt. I would regard all those as, well, the public view is negligible. Then we get on to the views from surrounding residential properties. Now, government guidance makes no reference to the amenity provided to private dwellings, but I accept you have some discretion in interpretation where, for example, an important tree might be a valuable amenity to numerous properties, but I would ask if it's appropriate to preserve a tree with the potential to completely blight 2 properties at Paddington Grove for the benefit of a few properties in St George's Drive. That brings me, I've got just about a time left I think, brings me to the future growth potential and impact on residents. I did provide a couple of photos of a red oak in Kew Gardens, a mature one, which would have been very useful in helping you visualise quite how big these trees get. They commonly reach 20 to 25 metres with crown spreads of 20 to 30 metres. They can grow 2.5 metres in a year, which is quite phenomenal, and undoubtedly it will develop to completely dominate the amenity space of 2 properties. So in conclusion, I would just ask if it's reasonable or proportionate to protect a young 30-year-old tree where it can't be retained in the long term because of its potential growth. Excuse me. And it will inevitably be resented by those living closest to it. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Hone.
Excuse me.
Members, any Councillor Kelsey.
Yeah, could you tell us, have we had any other objections from local residents? I presume their visibility is quite good from where the houses are surrounding that.
We haven't, I can confirm, we haven't had any other objections from local residents. We have had an email of support in relation to the order from a local resident, but that's it. We haven't had any other objections.
Councillor Bartlett.
The resident that flagged this issue up was presumably concerned that there was a planning application that could result in the tree being removed. Is that understanding correct?
I believe there is a current planning application for the site, but I, obviously not being a planning officer, I can't comment on that or make any comment in relation to the planning application. And in this case, we are, looking at the confirmation of the order as a separate matter.
Councillor Stribley.
Sorry.
Thank you, Chairman. This is a fairly young tree at 30 years old. It hasn't been growing at 2.5 metres a year because otherwise it would be 90 metres high and you'd see it right across Bournemouth, I guess. It is at the far end of the garden of 8A, so it's a full garden's length away from a house. So I think it's which in effect, I haven't got a rule here, but a number of metres. Looking at on the plan that we've got on page 16, looking at the spread of the tree, it's certainly nowhere near dominating or causing undue shadowing to adjacent bedroom windows. And in the future, should there be an approved development and this tree was a problem, then plainly there would be permission given for it to be removed or crown lifted or whatever else happened to be important at the time. In Poole, certainly, and I know this is technically over the border, but we're now in the same authority, we were, even with trees in rear gardens, we were always very keen to try and make something towards what we called green corridors. It's not just amenity of visible for all the properties that surround it from the rear in both St George's Drive and Paddington Grove, which will be able to see it, apart from a few passing people. Passers-by will see it more as it grows, but it is in effect a refuge for birds and other creatures as it goes, because it is important to keep green corridors. And when you get a development like this and a redevelopment, unfortunately whole sites get cleared and it takes a long time before you get that better environment back. So I don't see any reason not to confirm the order today. If works are required on amenity grounds in the future, then plainly those permissions would be granted. I would propose confirm the order, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Hall?
Second that, Chairman. But yeah,
No, you go.
Okay, thank you. If nobody else wants to comment, we'll go straight to the vote. Those in favour of confirming the TPO? And those against?
And just to confirm that Councillor Brooke didn't vote because he wasn't here at the start of that item. Okay.
Thank you, councillors. Moving on to the next item, which is this time the Oaks.
Chairman, before we start, can
Yes.
I just ask Councillor Brooke, he has a declaration to make on this item.
Fine. Fine. Thank you, Chair. My position on this particular item is publicly known. And I have in a predetermination situation, so I will not take part in this particular item. It would be wrong for me to do so.
Thank you, councillor. Okay, who do we have talking?
Thank you, Chairman, and thank you, members. The application before you is the temporary change of use of part of the site for car sales at the Oaks Garden Centre. I've just got to get used to this. Just to remind members and those who may not have been here last month for the previous application of the car wash. The application is located in the north west of Poole. There's an aerial photograph showing the actual site, which is in the northeast corner of the Oaks. And some aerial photographs just showing the site. Actually, I'll just go back to the previous one. Just to point out, can you see the mouse just showing you the protected trees to the east of the site? And the car wash application, which was refused last time, is just down in the south side of the site, just to give you some bearings. Some photographs of the site. We've got the street scene. I'm just putting my cursor over the entrance, which is to the east of the main entrance into the Oaks Garden Centre. some photographs showing the car sales, the layout of the cars, and then in the left lower corner we've got a photograph of the a car wash facility which is associated with the car sales, just to point out that that is outside the red line for this planning application. So whilst the planning history may allow for some additional retail type uses on the site, the Oaks is within the southeast Dorset Greenbelt, but government has just recently released some further guidance on how to assess openness in the Greenbelt, and the three matters have been highlighted as openness is capable of having a spatial and visual aspects, duration of the development and remediability, and degree of activity. So the car sales site is located on a part of the site which is free of permanent buildings and is therefore open. The car sales is positioned adjacent to the Queen Anne Drive and is significantly more visible than the recently refused car wash to the south of the Oaks. So the proposal has a visual presence of vehicles with an intensified degree of activity which would erode the open appearance of this part of the Oaks. So the proposal is therefore considered to fail to preserve the openness of the Greenbelt. This is the site plan, and it's actually the only scaled plan which has been submitted with the application. Access within the line has been confirmed by the applicant as being this access at the east, which I've just got the cursor over at the moment, and this will be the one that they are using for the car sales use. The applicant has been unable to provide any scale plan showing the parking plan for the sales vehicles, staff and customers. They haven't been able to provide on-site turning in a scale format either. So the application has been assessed to fail to demonstrate that the car sales would operate without materially harming the highway safety and efficiency. Just turning to other matters, there's adequate separation from the trees, protected trees, and neighbouring properties to the north to not raise any concerns in terms of their amenity. So the application is therefore recommended for refusal. Thank you.
Do we have anyone speaking?
Thanks, Chairman. Yes, we have an objector, Sharon Green, on behalf of the Oaks Action Group.
Good afternoon. My name is Sharon Green and I represent the Oaks Action Group. Can you hear me? Yes. And our strapline is Merley residents working to prevent the desecration of the green belt. We're all extremely grateful to this committee for rejecting last month's proposed car wash at the Oaks, which you did against officer advice. This proposal, which is intimately connected to the car wash, in spite of coming from a different applicant, is recommended for refusal, and we hope you will follow officer advice this time. You may care to know that the car washing and car repairs are still happening at the Oaks in support of the car sales, which have now been going on unlawfully for over a year. So if you turn down this application and your decision is properly enforced, we will lose the car sales and the nuisance of the car washing with its possible harms to protected trees and to surface water, and the car repairs with their revving engines, their power tools and the fumes. And these repairs take place during the day, in the evening, at weekends and bank holidays. We may also lose the inhabitants of the containers who, it seems, are employed to wash and repair the cars. We actually think that permission to live on site was granted because of a fraudulent affidavit submitted to the Borough of Poole, but that's since become irrelevant. However, loud music and noisy parties take place from time to time, and we have never discovered what happens to the human waste from that site. Of course, we can't be sure that new tenants will be any more neighbourly. I'll just mention a little history. When we moved into our house in 1992, most of the site was open green space, if not particularly well cared for. When the new owners took over, we saw a huge improvement. But over the years, things have gone badly downhill, with little pieces of land being tarmacked over surreptitiously. It is our fear that the plan is to cover the whole site so that it can no longer be deemed greenbelt. To accept this proposal today would be to reward this bad behaviour. And my last point concerns the original certificate of lawfulness granted in 1992. The site was granted use as a garden centre. That garden centre is now moribund, and according to the applicant's own planning consultant in a letter to Ms Godazar on February the 11th this year, quote, "The commercial nursery use is no longer taking place," unquote. All the subsequent proliferation of activity on the site, some lawful and some unlawful, has happened as a result of this original permission. We have to live with the consequences of that permission for an activity which isn't even there anymore, or is barely there. Sometimes planning law is very hard for ordinary people to understand. We ask you to reject this application. Thank you.
Thank you, Ms Green. Do we have the councillor, ward councillor speaking?
Councillor Burton.
Thank you very much. I'm Councillor Richard Burton. I'm representing a lot of the residents of Merling, so I'm speaking on their behalf. A lot of residents have voiced their concerns to me over several years, not only the people who live right next to it, but in the whole area of Merling. I think a lot of you become very familiar with the site. I know a number of you have actually visited, and we're very grateful for you to do that. And I'm also very grateful to the officers who have done a lot of work looking at this site over the past few years. The residents are particularly concerned because the method of operation on this site seems to be you do what you want to do, and then apply for a planning application if you have to, and then push the boundaries of what you've got as far as you can. If planning application was to be, and we're very grateful it has been recommended to be refused, we feel that the boundaries will just be pushed continually. What's going on? Examples, or many of them, rights of way have been blocked by the business, damaged trees are alleged to happen, although nobody has been prosecuted for that. Hard standing has been put in place. Already vehicles associated with the business are being parked outside of the red line area. Residents are very concerned that things like car transporters will be used and blocking the roads. Car repairs will continue and become worse, and using local roads to park cars on associated with the business. I'd also like to remind that it is right at the front of the green belt. It is very visible. In fact, the people on site are trying to make it more visible with their signage. They've got a lot of signs on cars for sale, signs on the fences along it. So rather than trying to make it invisible, they actually seem to want to make it as visible as possible. So I would heartily recommend that you refuse the permission for the site. Thank you very much.
Thank you, councillor. Okay, members, does anyone want to? Councillor Trent.
Yes, thank you, Chair. I drive past that site quite frequently and sometimes use what's left of the garden centre, and the car lot is totally inappropriate. Enforcement action should have been taken against it ages ago. I actually agree with the resident when they said that it's almost as if the greenbelt status of that area is being undermined, and you just wonder whether if there's a car wash facility, if there's a car sales lot, in the end someone's going to say, well, all this goes on in the site, we can kind of build this kind of out of town superstore or something like that. You know, there's all sorts of things which that is opening the door to, and I think we should refuse it wholeheartedly. And if the car sales doesn't cease quickly, we should take enforcement action against it. So I would support refuse.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor O'Neill?
Yeah, I'd like to like to comment, having visited this site over several weeks. It's a poorly managed site. There are drums that have had solvents or oils in them loosely stacked around the place. The same for pallets. There are quite a number of vehicles that have been there consistently upon my visit, appearing to await refurbishment. The roads largely are unmade and very uneven, and yet this is interspersed with public visitors to the garden centre and footfall through those areas. The site is a health and safety risk, as apart from an environmental risk. I understand the site originally was designated for A1 retail. Not only would I seek to refuse this, I would also ask that the council investigate one or two other so-called retail opportunities that are on that site. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Councillor Bartlett?
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to propose that we accept the officer's recommendation for refusal of this application.
Do we have a seconder? Thank you, Councillor Kelsey. Okay, so then Councillor Stribley.
Yes, Chairman.
Thank you, Councillor. Did you want to come back?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Just wanted to clarify on a few points that have been raised. Firstly, the site that you're considering today is the car sales within the Red Line. I know there are issues outside within the Oaks Centre as a whole, but it is that application that you're considering today. There were a few issues in terms of the taking up the hard standing, and there's also I think it was a metal road, which is within the Red Line. Those have actually been a matter of enforcement in the past, which failed. So those, and they had been installed within, I think it was more than 4 years when the enforcement action was actually taken. So those aspects of this application site are there, and if enforcement action were to be taken, it would be on the car sales change of use as opposed to, say, the hard standing, which is already on the site. Thank you.
hard standing was put down for the car sales area, and that hasn't been there 4 years. It's been about 2. And that certainly could be removed. I know there are other issues and arguments over other parts of the site, but not within this part. There is a partly metalled road put into the scaffolding, again an inappropriate development on a temporary permission, I understand, at the rear of the site, but the main body of the car sales area was not subject to the previous attempt to deal with the site, and certainly hasn't been covered with hard standing for 4 years.
Just to reply, if those aspects are part of this current application, an enforcement action is to be taken, and it would be investigated, and they need to make sure that the enforcement notice applies to that activity. Thank you.
Councillor Hall. Okay, we have a move on the table. If there's no other comments, then I suggest we move to vote. Can we have a vote in favour of the move? Do you want to?
I'm going to get council.
Thank you, members. Okay, moving on to 49 Richmond Park Avenue. Are you? Peter Burridge will be leading.
Good afternoon, everybody. This application concerns 49 Richmond Park Avenue. It is for alterations, extensions and conversion of premises to form 4 flats. The application also includes direction of cycle and bin stores and formation of parking spaces. This is an area map just to give everybody an idea as to where the application site is. So it's identified in red on the site. To give you some sort of context, to the east is Winton Recreation Ground and Charminster Road, and to the west we have Queen's Park. It's also set in context to the coastline. That is the application site location plan, the property outlined by the red star. This gives you an aerial view of the property from the front. If I just put the there's the cursor on the on the property there. It seems to have disappeared. Oh, there it is. There. Just to highlight the property from the front. So that shows that on the left-hand side we have a neighbouring single-storey bungalow. On the right-hand side we have a 2-storey building of sort of similar size and scale to the host property. And that is, just move the cursor again. There's the property viewed from the rear, so it just gives you an idea of the building line at the back, the works that have been undertaken to other properties, and the extent of the rear garden and the properties behind. This is a road view of the property, so the property is shown centrally. You can see in that property quite clearly the existing front boundary wall and the hedgerow, which does screen much of the ground floor element and the front garden. There is an existing pedestrian access to the left-hand side, which can be seen in that picture. This shows the front garden area behind the front boundary wall and hedge. So it's not covered by grass. And as I said, it's not particularly visible within the street scene. To the right, along the right-hand boundary, is the existing driveway, which leads down the side of the property to a detached garage at the rear. Just sort of included this picture just to highlight the location of the existing bins, which are stored to the front of the site, behind the front boundary wall. Presently, the property is in use as two flats, a ground floor flat and a first floor flat. This view shows a view towards the rear boundary, which shows at ground level there aren't views towards the properties behind, and there is quite robust screening along the rear boundary. This view shows the rear of the property looking towards 51 Richmond Park Avenue, and just in the corner on the left is the existing garage, which is detached. As part of this application, it would be truncated and converted into the cycle store. This view shows the property to the left hand side, so that's 51 Richmond Park Avenue, and just gives you an idea as to the relationship and the windows, the existing windows in that property, which face towards the application site. And then this is looking towards the other boundary of 47D Richmond Park Avenue, which is the bungalow. So that again is a view in the rear garden. You can just see the rear corner of the host dwelling, looking towards the garage, detached garage which they've got on the boundary, and the bungalow which sits beyond. And that's a view down the side of down the side of the host property, just to give you an idea of the spacing between this property and the bungalow next door. So the application, which is recommended for approval, would include a two-storey rear extension, which further to the receipt of amended plans would project 2.5 metres from the existing rear wall. It would be it would be two-storey to one side, shown by the cursor here, with the other element single-storey. So at single-storey, it does extend across the rear. This shows the extent of the garage, which would be removed and converted into the cycle store. At ground floor, we have two flats. At first floor, spread across first floor and second floor, we have two further flats, with flat 3 at the first floor and flat 4 in the roof space and the floor below. The site location plan here shows that the front garden area, part of the front garden would be lost to car parking, but there would be an element of front garden area retained to this side. The bin store would be in the same location as the existing bins, and we also have some boundary planting here where the cursor is, just to give some buffer screening to the ground floor residents, so that upstairs residents won't have direct views into the ground floor flats. We've got a similar boundary treatment at the front here, but if granted, we have suggested conditions about hard and soft landscaping. And finally, this is the proposed elevations, which shows the extent of the rear extension on the back, the two-storey element attached to the single-storey element, and the application does include a reworked dormer on the back as well. So, thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Burridge. We have a number of speakers. Mr. Still, a local resident, would you like to come forward? I believe you're also reading out something from Councillor Anderson, but if we can just deal with your bit first, and we'll come to that afterwards. So you won't be lovely? Okay, that's fine, thank you. I'm afraid not. When you're ready.
So can you hear me? I do have some slides as well, please. So, yes, so I'm Tony Still. I actually live in Richmond Park Avenue, but I'm representing the Queen's Park Neighbourhood Forum as well. Neighbourhood Forum's more than 120 people now, and we are in the early stages of writing a neighbourhood plan. We have the next slide, please. I feel like I've been outgunned on photographs, but I thought photographs would be useful. I do have to tell you about the left one though, because I nearly gave my life in getting the left-hand photo. So I do just have to say what a great photo it is. I was standing in front of the gateway there. There were parked cars. I took both these pictures yesterday morning. There were plenty of parked cars. I noticed traffic coming from both directions, car coming both directions simultaneously, but the DHL long wheelbase parcel delivery van that was stopped opposite me suddenly decided that he needed to do his 3-point turn before the traffic arrived, so he used both pavements. But I'm quick on my feet, so he didn't knock me down. Can I move on to the next slide, please? So I'm going to make a couple of significant, I hope significant points. The first one's about the quality of accommodation. This is a revised application. The original application did not meet the national minimum floor space requirements, or the standard rather, in a number of ways. 6 or 8 things it missed. The extension, the proposed extension, has been revised to now, and it's grown by 0.5 metre, which is 19 inches in old money. That's added between 3 and 5% floor space to several of the units. So now, rather than just missing the standard, they just meet the standard. However, I'm afraid my slide's not rendering properly, but however, there are still a number of points where the plan does not meet the national minimum standards, and I can't see my next bullet point, which is a shame. So I have to go back to my notes. The other issue with these units being so small, I think the point is, we can argue, don't they meet the national standards? They don't, but they are far more in compliance than they were, but they still don't meet them. But the point is, they are very small. In the officer's report, I presume it's a he, talks about concern regarding acoustic insulation between the properties, living rooms and bedrooms being adjacent vertically and so on. This is small accommodation. It does not look hopeful as being quality of accommodation. So there's an absolute quality issue around the accommodation. It's also out of character with the area because, as you've seen on several of the photographs, the road is essentially large family houses. Now this one's already long been divided into 2 flats, 2 good quality in terms of space flats. Dividing it again into 2 is giving us these very marginal flats, which we feel simply does not meet either the character area or the required quality. Have my next slide, please. Next slide, please. Thank you. Parking. You will have noticed that almost all the objections, and there were many, referred to parking. Now, I recognise that street parking is not in itself an issue that we should consider here, but I think parking is a proxy for something else. The residents are seeing the impact of all these vehicles because there's another conversion in progress just down the road, for example, and those vehicles are a proxy for population density, and it's the population density that's giving us these problems. Parking problem is one. Okay, I'm sure I was just there at the wrong moment, but the parking and the traffic become an issue, and this proposal will double or maybe more the population density on that site. I happen to know it was 2 single elderly gentlemen, one living in each flat, previous to this proposal, and now there are going to be 4 flats. So population density, big issue in forum discussions. This is going in the wrong direction. So could I have my summary slide, please? I think I've said all of this. I've referenced back to the Bournemouth plans, CS 21, 22, one or other applies, 41, and 41. So in conclusion, the opinion of the people who have objected and the wider opinion of the forum, in the sense that these are issues that we keep hearing about, is that we should not approve something of this nature. Thank you.
Thank you,
Sure,
Mr.
I can't have the other 5 minutes?
I'm afraid not this time. And we have Mr. McCohen on behalf of Pure Town.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, councillors. As noted, a previous proposal to convert the building into 5 flats was refused in April of this year. Concerns were raised in respect of the size of the flats and the loss of the front garden element. Ongoing consultations with the planning officer has sought to address these previous objections, delivering an amended and improved scheme, which is now recommended for approval. Richmond Park Avenue itself, as mentioned, it typically comprises large detached dwellings, although there are a number of properties which have been converted into flats. One, as noted, number 45, a couple of doors down, which was also approved for 4 flats in January of last year. The current proposal sees a modest single and 2-storey extension to the rear and allows the conversion of the property to form 2 2-bed flats on the ground level and 2 2-bed flats on the first level, with flat 4's bedrooms located in the existing roof space. The northern side of Richmond Park Avenue sees a variety of garden and parking arrangements. It's evident that there are multiple properties with more expansive hard standing to allow for increased parking, often with interspersed soft landscaping and boundary treatments which help to soften their appearance from the street scene. The site frontage sees a reduction in parking spaces from the previous proposal and an increase in soft landscaping. The revised parking layout, no longer with a central access, allows for more screening to Richmond Park Avenue, thereby improving its visual presence. Most importantly, the proposal, due to the lack of alterations to the building from public view, maintains the existing contribution it makes to the locality, safeguarding the character and appearance of the area. The officer's report notes how the proposed conversion will relate to neighbouring properties. Similarly to the LPA's appraisal of the previous application, there will be no harmful impact upon the neighbouring bungalow at number 47D. It was noted that a single west elevation bathroom window can be obscure glazed by way of condition, with the additional, the existing 1.8 metre high boundary fence also providing further limitations in terms of views to ground floor windows. The relationship between ground and upper floor windows between 49 and its opposite neighbour at 51 will also remain largely unchanged, with the existing 4-metre gap between properties unaffected. A secondary kitchen window to the east elevation will be screened by boundary treatment, and the upper floor roof lights are at high level, which prevent against any impact to privacy or amenity. In terms of the rear properties at numbers 58 and 60 Richmond Park Road, these are set almost 40 metres back from respective rear elevations to avoid any impact in terms of visual presence. A key aspect, as noted, of the previous refusal was the size of the proposed units being below the technical standards. The amended scheme reduces the number of units to 4, whilst also marginally increasing the rear extension. In doing so, all proposed units now have been increased and now exceed the space standard requirements, overcoming this previous reason for refusal. Due to the reduction in units, the parking provision has also been amended to reflect this change. The proposed provision is policy compliant, with a cycle store housed in the converted garage to the eastern boundary, and the bin store siding has been amended to the same position of the existing arrangement, being less prominent than the previous proposal from the street scene. In summary, the revised proposal sees a reduction in flat numbers from 5 to 4, which in turn creates a less intensive and lower density form of residential conversion to the existing property. The amenity of neighbouring properties will be safeguarded, and the accommodation sizes themselves meet the standard. The external fabric of the building and the contribution it makes to Richmond Park Avenue will be retained, thereby creating no harm to the character of the area. The amended parking arrangement allows for increased garden area to the site frontage and screening to the parking spaces themselves when viewed from Richmond Park Avenue, in the same vein which is present elsewhere in the street scene. The application to convert the building to create 2 further flats is located close to the neighbouring district centre and a key transport route, and is therefore in a highly sustainable location to serve this form of development. The applicant has proactively worked with the officer and amended plans accordingly to deliver a policy compliance scheme which seeks to address the previous concerns. The resulting proposal assimilates into the pattern of development and the character and appearance of Richmond Park Avenue without any harmful impact. With this in mind, I ask that you please take this and your officer's recommendation into consideration and offer your support today. Thank you, councillors.
Thank you. Well, members, do we have any comments? Anyone want? Councillor Bartlett?
Could I just ask a question on the parking or the excess or egress from the parking area? One of the parking slots, will the car actually have to reverse out onto the main road?
With the space which you drive directly into, yes, my understanding is that you would have to reverse out, but the highway officer in his comments has noted that that isn't dissimilar or is the same as the existing situation. With regard to the other 3 spaces, it's been designed in such a way that you should be able to turn around.
Yeah, it does concern me about reversing onto that road, which is a very busy road, but given that it's not worse than the current situation, it's difficult to object to it. So I think it is of concern that vehicles are reversing out onto that road from the driveways.
Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm just looking at section 10, where it's looking at the refusal of the April 2019, and the statement talking about would result in obviously this was 5 flats, now reduced, but it was talking about intensive residential development, harmful character and appearance of the area, and also about the residential amenities of future occupiers, so that probably related to size. But it also then goes on to say about the harm would be evident reason of loss of the front garden and associated vegetarian. Just really, if the officer could just confirm how he thinks the new proposal has addressed all those, please.
Okay, with the previous application, which was for 1 extra flat, as we've noted, there was 1 extra car parking space. And it had been designed in such a way that the access was going to be positioned centrally, and you'd come into car parking spaces on either side, so there was no front garden area at all that was retained. The would-be 6th space was then going to be the bin allocation. So in that instance, we had no greenery at the frontage, and there also wasn't the option of really keeping any particular front boundary treatment, given the reposition of the access to the middle. In this application, we've obviously sought to move it over to the side. The bin stall was originally shown alongside the spaces where the grass is, but that's now been moved to the side, so we do keep some greenery to the front. And the plans also show the retention of some of the front boundary wall, and we've also attached conditions about soft and hard landscaping, so that we could achieve some form of front boundary treatment in a similar way to the existing.
Just come back on the reference to residential future residents amenity. Was that relating to the size of the units, and do they meet the required standards? Thank you.
The concerns about the residential amenities of future occupiers was 2 things. It was the size of the units, and it was also in respect of the ground floor occupants, where a communal garden was shown, and there was no buffer planting or any way in which the privacy of the ground floor residents would be safeguarded. So in the revised plan, we do have different parts of the garden allocated to different residents to help achieve some privacy. In terms of the space standards, it is important to note that they're not adopted. They are nationally described space standards which we adhere to, but they're not formally adopted. But yes, the previous units were all below the standards. In this instance, we've obviously lost a unit. The extension is slightly bigger, so all of the units have increased in size. The report says that 3 of the units now meet the space standards. There's a slight question mark over the 4th unit, given that an element of the accommodation is in the roof space, and the space standards in detail do say that you can only include the floor space, which has got a floor to ceiling height of 2.3 metres. Now, according to my calculations, it falls just slightly below that if you don't include the rest of the space, but overall we consider it to be acceptable.
Councillor Brooke.
Fine. Thank you, Chair. Have to say I'm struggling here to find reasons why this should be refused. The ridge height of the original property remains the same. As far as I can see, the extension at the back is a relatively small proportion of the overall footprint of the area. The car parking, albeit a bit tight, doesn't go into the back garden and therefore reduces any disturbance that there might have been there, which many flats these days seem to have. There's green space retained, there's sufficient amenity space, and yes, the flats individually are a little bit on the small side, but the majority are meeting the standards, and as they're not adopted, I can't see any substantive reason why this should be refused. So I'm quite happy to support the recommendation of grant.
Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. I looked at this site last night, and I actually parked outside the wrong house, and I thought, oh, that looks plenty big, no issue here, and it turned out to be the one that's been granted for 4 flats. But that one was considerably bigger than this site, and I fear that with 4 flats, not only does it produce flats which are marginal to substandard, but it also, I think, creates a glorified car park in the front garden. And one of the things noticeable there was that it has got a tree sort of hedgy type of environment, and it has a character of its own. And I personally could only really go as far as the 1 extra flat, not 2 extra flats, because I think it does change the character of the area, and it does crowd the site a bit. So I'm personally not in favour of going for 4 flats.
Councillor Kelsey.
Yes, Chairman. Could I just ask the officer, please, could you tell me where the 3rd bedroom is for the flat that is spread over the 1st and 2nd floor? Because I can't find it anywhere on these plans.
I think it's a 2-bedroom flat.
No, it clearly says in your reports there will be 2 2-bedroom flats at ground level, a 2-bedroom flat at 1st floor level, and a 3-bedroom flat spread across the 1st and 2nd floors.
Well, that's a possible error in the report then, so I apologise. I think it's the master bedroom and a bedroom 2 in the roof level. No, so it's a 2-bedroom flat. Yeah.
Thank you for pointing it out, Councillor Kelsey.
Should have been noted at the previous meetings, Chairman.
Any other members wish to comment? Councillor O'Neill.
Yeah, I've just got one question. In the report, page 133, this issue of 73% versus 75%, it's been acknowledged in the report that 73% is acceptable. Are we therefore saying that these parameters are no longer meaningful? Because if we walk away from them, they have no value. And indeed, I'm sure there are developers out there that will be delighted.
Are you talking about the national standards? They're not adopted by the authority.
My concern is that somebody then comes along and says, well, we're not hitting 75%, but we're hitting 74% or 72%, and you've already approved 73%.
Chair, if it helps, if it's not a policy as the authority at this point, then our ability to insist on that level is restricted and limited. So we will look to try and achieve that minimum standard, but we're hamstrung at this time in insisting on it. My understanding is the government had mooted making that a standard in the future, and we may see that introduced as a standard, but as we are, as set out on paragraph 37,
it's a useful benchmark, but it's not a target we must achieve.
Right, okay. It's just that my past experience of standards is if you ignore them, they don't matter.
I think the response is if it's a standard set in our policy and it's adopted in the local plan, then it's something we can insist upon. Where it's a benchmark set by the government and it's no more than a benchmark at this time, then the power to insist on it as a minimum to achieve is restricted. So if we get to that point, if the government takes the view that all dwellings must meet this standard, then we can insist on it.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Stribley.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I ask a question? Paragraph 39 on page 133. Previously it was noted that the ground floor units would suffer a lack of privacy with bedroom and living rooms opening out onto communal areas, with no defensible space provided and or shown. This issue has now been addressed through the submission of amended plans, whilst further delays can be agreed by means of a soft landscaping condition. Outside your bedrooms and living rooms, where does the soft landscaping come in? No, it's talking about communal areas. You're not going to have soft landscaping in it, according to this report.
As further details can be secured. So if you can see the cursor here, the plan shows some soft landscaping here and along this boundary here. Yep. So the areas inside would be more private. In terms of the further details, that would be what type of landscaping might be appropriate. So that could then be agreed by condition. So it could be the form of planting that's planted, the height, really just to help ensure that we get something which is going to be acceptable. And there is also a landscape management plan condition as well, so that we could ensure that those elements are retained.
I do appreciate that the landscaping is outside, but surely the bedrooms and living rooms open into the interior communal area, or do you have to go outside your bedroom into the garden to get anywhere? It's just the way it's written. It doesn't make any sense at all to me. I'm sorry.
Well, it was referring to the outside areas and on the previous scheme, the possibility of other residents being able to come up alongside a window and look into that room from the outside. So this scheme's been designed to try and ensure that that wouldn't happen.
Okay, well, we haven't got the previous, and some of us are new here. We've no idea of the previous, so it certainly doesn't make a lot of sense. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor. Do we have a move, anyone? From anyone? Councillor Brooke. And seconded by Councillor Hughes.
Chair, to second that.
Thank you. All those in favour of granting this application?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10.
Those against?
2.
Any abstentions? No. Thank you. Okay, moving on. The next application we have is for 74 The Grove, and Mr. Chilvers will lead on that.
Thank you, Chairman. Good afternoon, everybody. This application, as you can see, is to erect a 3-storey building containing 3 maisonettes and 1 flat. It includes the erection of a bin and cycle store to the rear of the new building and the creation of a parking area to the front. There's also communal gardens to the rear. Before I go into the application, I apologise, but there's a couple of corrections to the report which I'd like to bring to your attention. The first relates to page 68, paragraph 55, where there is reference to the proposal meeting adopted parking guidelines. The highway officer has confirmed that's not actually the case. There's no objection from the Dorset highway officer, but the development would require 6 spaces under the parking guidance, and it's currently indicated as 4. The the BCP highway officer has confirmed that this doesn't raise any serious highway safety issues, and he is content that the conclusion about the acceptability of parking remains on this proposal. There's a couple of other things to bring to your attention relating primarily to conditions. I'm afraid there appeared to have been some confusion in the text of the report. There's reference to a condition which isn't actually in the report, so apologies to that. That's in paragraph 48. There's reference there to the condition 6 relating to proposed boundary treatment. I'll come on to that later in the presentation, but clearly there is no, in the report at the moment, there is no condition relating to boundary treatment. Further up the page, paragraph 44, the reference to condition 5 should be condition 6, and at paragraph 47, the reference to condition 5 should be condition 7. Apologies for that confusion. And finally, just in terms of paragraph 38 on page 66, I'm afraid there was an incorrect stipulation of distances. The single-storey element of the proposed building at the rear would project approximately 2 metres beyond the rear of the dwelling at number 76. And then going on to paragraph 39, the 2-storey element of the proposed building would project approximately 1 metre beyond the existing rear elevation of number 72. So with those clarifications and corrections, I'll run on with the report. We have the location plan on the screen. You can see that the site is indicated up here for assistance in locating the area. The property is in the Grove, which is a road that runs between Barrack Road, which is this A35 road here, and Fairmore Road, which is this road here. These are the 2 main entrances, as I'm sure you're aware, running into the town of Christchurch. You can see this site is located within a residential area. The application site itself is a very long rectangular plot. It falls away from the levels at the front of the site, and the back garden, certainly on my previous visits, was extremely overgrown, but It's predominantly vegetation and some trees. This particular plan doesn't show the complete footprint of 72. There's a conservatory to the rear, and number 76 has been enlarged with a 2-storey extension that takes the footprint out to the rear as well. The existing property is a bungalow with a pyramidal roof form. It currently provides for 2 bedrooms, and you can see the floor plan layout on that plan. The proposal in front of you is referred to as a 3-storey. When you look at it from the front of the site, it's effectively a 2-storey building with a dormer in the roof space. You can see the adjacent property here is a 2-storey, whereas number 72 is a bungalow with some accommodation in the roof. The character of the area generally is mixed. There are some substantial 2-storey properties, but there's also some bungalows, some chalet bungalows, some 1.5-storey properties. The proposal includes parking for 4 vehicles at the front of the site, and the retention and enhancement of landscaping in this corner here. There's an area located over here for the collection of refuse bins, but the site or the proposed building would have pathway around the side and then a sloping path at the back here to a bin and cycle store. The cycle store would be here with a window, and the bin store would be there. One of the issues raised in representations of objection to the proposal has been the siting of this bin store relative to the rear of number 76. Here you can see the full length of the existing building at 76. The separation distance is in excess of 14 metres. Just moving on to the issue about boundary treatment, should the application be put forward by members for approval, a condition relating to boundary treatment could be added, but this plan indicates a 1.8 metre close bordered fence along the boundary with number 72. The boundary with number 76 is currently marked by a fence which tapers as you come to the roadside. The other thing to be aware of in terms of the relationship to number 76, as I say, the site, application site drops away to the rear. Similarly, there's a level change at number 76, and that property has a large patio area in this location here, which levels out the ground on that site, and it drops away to the rear. This plan indicates a tree in this location, which is, I'm afraid, a dead tree. But the arboricultural officer has addressed the issues with regard to trees on the site, and the scheme has come up with appropriate measures to lay out the parking here and also the hard surface here for the bin store. This tree at the front is a street tree. It's a big oak tree, which is characteristic of a lot of the grove. There's a lot of trees in the street. It's a feature certainly when you look at it from the front of the site. Now the proposal, as I say, with the front elevation has a dormer to the front, and then from the perspective of number 76, you'll see that there's a 2-storey projection which is effectively to the level with the rear of the extended number 76, and then a single-storey element that projects to the rear. This elevation contains 3 separate entrances. The proposal includes 3 maisonettes and then a flat on the first floor, which would be served by these roof lights plus dormer, and then a full height window in the rear elevation with a Juliet balcony. The elevation facing number 72 is a shortened 2-storey element with a single storey projecting to the rear. The accommodation, as you can see from the ground floor, provides for 2 bedrooms and a bathroom for Unit 1. Unit 2 has a kitchen and a living area with patio doors out onto a small patio area at the rear. Unit 3 on the ground floor has a kitchen living area with patio doors out onto a small patio area to the rear of that property. As you go up onto the first floor, Unit 2 has 2 bedrooms and a couple of bathrooms. Unit 3 has a couple of bedrooms and a bathroom. Then there's a stairwell between Unit 3 and Unit 1, and the main living space at Unit 1 is on the first floor. The flat is contained in the second floor. As I say, it's served by the dormer window at the front. Then you've got the roof lights, one over the stairwell, one in the kitchen area, and then one which is a secondary window to the living space. On the other side, you've got a bedroom and a bathroom served by the roof lights that face onto number 72, which are here and here. Now, this cross-section indicates the way that the levels change across the site. You'll see in this area here, it's quite a significant fall away in the ground level, but the bin and cycle store would be raised approximately 0.8 of a metre above that ground level. You can see there's a planted area with some additional possibilities of fence or boundary details, which, as I say, could be secured by condition if that's considered appropriate. This is the planting area here. We've got a slope, so in terms of disabled access, it would be possible to accommodate disabled users or occupiers, including ease of access to the cycle store at the rear here. The tree protection details were considered appropriate by the arboricultural officer, and particular care was required with regard to the works here because of the preserved tree. The council's arboricultural officer is satisfied that the arboricultural submission deals adequately with the trees, and there is a condition requiring a pre-commencement meeting should the development be approved. The submission includes some path assessments, which I won't go into detail here, but it's just an indication of the likely impact of the increased built form compared to the existing, which is the top line, and the proposed. This is at March, and then through to June. And then in December. It's one of the issues that was raised in particular by the adjacent property at number 76 here. You can see that there will be some additional shading impact, but this is the shortest day, and there's quite a significant shading already taking place. In terms of the site itself, this is the bungalow subject to the application. You can see there's a separation distance between the two properties here. This is the 2-storey property which we've been talking about, and that's the dead tree in the background. The built form will come approximately 1.8 metres closer to this property, but there'll still be a separation distance. This photograph to the right here indicates some of the other characteristics of the properties in the road, and the bottom photo here is taken from the adjacent road junction. You can just see in the background there with the solar panels, that is this property number 76. So in terms of possible impact on the street scene, the proposed property would appear in that perspective instead of the view of number 76. But if you were to view it from further down the Grove, the existence of this two-storey property would limit the view or the perspective of the new building. This photo here shows the oak tree, which, as I say, is not considered to be under risk from the development. These photos are from, well, this photo here is from the front of the site. You'll see it's already laid down to gravel and is generally used as a parking turning area for the existing property. You can see the existing boundary fence, which could be replaced if we were to pursue a boundary condition. This photograph here is taken from the rear of the existing property, and you can see the extent to which number 76 projects beyond the existing property. This is the rear of number 76 with the raised patio area, and again that's the dead tree in this photograph. You can see from the extent to which this patio area extends beyond the rear elevation of number 76, that comparatively speaking, the projection of any patio area to the rear of the proposed development is unlikely to project any further than this. You've got a boundary fence as indicated there. Looking the other way, the existing bungalow at number 72 has an elevation facing the site with, I believe, a bathroom window there and a window there. The property also has a conservatory at the back, which, as you can see, extends beyond the rear elevation of the existing bungalow. To the front, this is where the proposed parking would go. There's existing vegetation and trees here, some of which would be removed and enhanced with planting indicated on that plan I showed you earlier. The proposed development is looking to maximise the use of the site. Consideration has been given to the extent to which the impact of the development would alter the amenity or living conditions of neighbouring properties. The officer recommendation is for approval because the consideration is that there wouldn't be significant harm to the amenities of either occupier. There's no significant impact with regard to trees. The highway officer doesn't object to the parking proposal, and the officer recommendation is therefore for approval. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Jules. We have a number of people speaking on this application. Jeanette Nikowski and Luke English. Right. That's okay.
Yeah, that's fine. So it's Mr. Nikowski. And can I just check, are you going to incorporate Mr. English's comments in your speech, or are you going to allow enough time for me to read out his comments?
This is just a personal speech because we live at number 72.
Okay. So are you going to allow enough time for me to read out the second speaker's comments? Brilliant. Thank you.
Well, as I just said, this is a personal objection because we live in number 72. A lot of the talk's been about number 76, but we haven't been mentioned, so it's a good job I'm here. It's a small bungalow, number 72, and we totally object to the plans. The proposed building will severely overlook our family home, losing all sense of privacy. The height of the proposed property will totally overshadow us, taking away the majority of our light over our conservatory, which is used as our main living room. Another privacy issue, it would allow enabling direct visibility into our home. Due to the number of properties, there would not be enough allocated parking, which has already been mentioned. I do believe that the recommendation is 6, but there is only room for 4. So how would they get through that? It's on a junction. It's quite a busy junction opposite Elm Avenue, and it has limited visibility by also a bus stop, which is right outside as well, which hasn't been mentioned. Both our properties are at the end of a bend in the road. We would foresee accidents in the future due to the increased vehicles parking on the road. I do have some photos recently taken here, which, if you'd like to have a look at them, pass them round, I would much appreciate it. The impact of building 4 properties in place of 1 will increase the noise pollution to the area, which at present is calm and a quiet part of Christchurch apart from the traffic. Now I come to the nature conservation. The proposed plot is inhabited by a large number of wild species, including foxes, a variety of birds, frogs, hedgehogs, to name but a few. This planning would destroy their natural habitat. Another issue which has not been raised is in the winter time, both our garden and number 74 severely floods. There is an underground stream, so the flooding, that's why it goes down. Both our gardens go right down, and all the excess water from the surrounding properties filters into our gardens, and they both flood. I do have actual personal photos on my camera if you'd like to see them at a later date. So that is a real issue there. In this road, all the properties are 2 stories or less. This proposal will be out of character with all the neighbouring properties and will stick out basically like a sore thumb. So we ask you to reject this application. I do understand there have been 37 objections, and mine is just one of them. I do not speak on behalf of anybody else. It is just because it will affect us directly. Thank you. As I said, my first time.
So I also have a statement to read out from Mr. Luke English, who lives at number 76. If I could refer you, because it will save time, to page 66 of the report, paragraphs 38, 39 and 42. So in response to paragraph 38, Mr. English says, I acknowledge the Council's view in this, but there is no proposal to rectify the impact that this will have on number 76. The Council has failed to deal with this point. How does the Council plan to rectify this issue? In respect of 39, his response is, this section does not deal with the height of the structure, which according to the plans is still unknown. It also indicates that it is acceptable for the new residents to see into the garden of number 76 and adjacent gardens. Number 76 has a 7-year-old daughter and is extremely concerned about this comment and the lack of privacy, as I'm sure the residents are of number 72. How does the Council propose to deal with this privacy issue? And paragraph 42. Unfortunately, this is incorrect. The report does not take into account the front door to the maisonettes is opposite the lounge of number 76, and the constant use of its residents will cause noise and light pollution and a lack of privacy to the residents at number 76. Currently number 74 is a single-storey bungalow. Building a two-storey structure will cause loss of light to the residents at number 76. There is no way the new structure will not overshadow number 76. In addition, number 76 will need to see the report that claims no loss of light will occur. The council has failed to provide such report to the adjacent properties and failed in this issue. How does the council propose to rectify this? Finally, the council has failed to deal with the boundary fencing to the adjacent properties, currently due to the dilapidated state. So I'll finish there. There was also a statement submitted by Donna Taylor, who also lives in the road, but I haven't got time to read that out, I'm afraid.
Thank you. We have...
Chairman, with respect, shouldn't such representations have been circulated to us as a matter of course?
Just to clarify, Chairman, this was a person who would like to have attended to speak to you personally but was unable to, and therefore has produced something that they would like read out instead.
Okay, we have Mr. Stevens from Aspire Architects who wish to speak.
Good afternoon, Chairman and members of the Planning Committee. Thank you for giving me the opportunity to speak to you today. My name is Matt Stevens. I am an architect and director of Aspire Architects in Christchurch. This planning application in front of you today is a result of lengthy pre-app discussions and feedback from the previously withdrawn planning application. We have worked very hard to overcome all previous concerns, and with the guidance of the planning officers, we feel that this has resulted in a well-designed scheme. Planning officers have accepted the principle of residential development on this site from the outset. There is an existing bungalow on the site that is almost beyond repair, so financially viable options needed to be considered here. As detailed in the case officer's report, this proposal meets the requirements of the MPPF and is deemed appropriate development. The case officer also writes, the scheme complies with policy HE2 in being compatible with or improving its surrounding in relation to nearby properties, including minimising general disturbance to amenity and in its impacts on the character of the area. As you will see, we have worked hard to ensure that there are no overlooking issues to adjacent properties, and the proposed building represents the proportions of the adjacent substantial two-storey dwelling next door, whilst maintaining the similar relationships between the adjacent bungalow within the street scene. The Highways Authority have raised no objection in terms of highway safety, and all other relevant consultees are satisfied with the submitted design and information, including biodiversity and flooding. It is noted in the case officer's report that the council does not have a 5-year housing land supply, and if this scheme is to be approved, it will provide open market affordable homes which will be offered through the Help to Buy scheme by my clients. I would therefore ask you to support your planning officer's recommendation and approve this planning application today, which will provide much needed housing for Christchurch.
Thank you, Mr. Stevens. Councillor Phipps.
Thank you. I'm Councillor Margaret Phipps. I'm Ward Councillor for the Commons. I'm basically here to represent those residents who've objected and aren't able to be here. The key issues, as I see it, are actually the principles of this development, the impact on the character of the surrounding area, and the impact on nearby residential amenity and also the parking provision. In the report, the character of the area is described as being in the Christchurch Borough-wide character assessment, a leafy suburb of sylvan character. It acknowledges that it is sensitive to enlargement of properties and further infill. And paragraph 127 of the MPPF requires that development should add to the overall quality of the area. You will see there have been a lot of objections. It says 32 in the report, and I've just heard there might be 37, I don't know which is correct, to this development, raising many issues of concern, which include the proposal being out of character and having a negative impact on the residential amenity of the surrounding area. Number 72, as you heard, is a bungalow, and this 3-storey property will visually dominate that much smaller property and potentially overlook and overshadow it into their ground floor, certainly from the higher balcony above on the new property. In addition, there is an increase from its current size, and the officer mentioned this, and I'm not quite sure, there's some errors in the report, obviously, but what it says in the report is 2 metres to the rear. And it just seems that number 72 will be somewhat overwhelmed by this, having previously just had a similar bungalow next door. This whole area is made up of bungalows and houses, and I do hope you will listen seriously to the concerns of the people who live in this area. They like where they live and they want to maintain the character of it. That amount of objections is a huge amount of concern to me. And this development of 3 stories with an increased footprint, I believe, will set a dangerous precedent which could ultimately change the whole character of the area. It's large. This isn't city centre. This is a leafy suburb. Other concerns have been raised about parking provision, and having increased the occupancy of the property, there isn't enough parking provision. Now, it says 4 in the report, another error, but apparently it requires 6, so we're now told. And I was about to say, well, there won't be enough parking and it's going to push parking onto the road, so I think I'm probably right. Anyone familiar with this area knows that cars are already parked along both sides in places, and this property is on a bend and a junction. For me, it does come down to a matter of principle which should apply not only in Christchurch, but to all our towns within BCP and this new council. Are we going to try to preserve the identity and character of our communities and listen to our residents who live there? Or are we going to say, well, never mind, we'll allow developments which actually we don't think are in keeping, potentially overlook next door and could increase on-street parking? With this many residents objecting, I just think something's not quite right. Those objections should hold weight. And it is my belief that this application is contrary to saved policy H12 of the Christchurch local plan, being inappropriate in character and scale to the immediate locality by height, adversely affecting number 72 by overlook and loss of privacy. Also, I consider it to be contrary to policy HE2 of the core strategy, as the development is not compatible with or improves the surroundings because of its scale, bulk and height. Nor does it improve the building's relationship with nearby properties by producing dominance, overlook and loss of privacy. You could say as well, paragraph 1.127 of the MPPF, it might be contrary to that, as I don't think it actually adds to the quality of the area. Thank you.
Thank you, Councillor Phipps. Do we have a highways officer for this one here? Yeah, please, yeah. Just thought it might be useful to have you possibly some questions on the highway situation. Councillors, Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. I'd like to clarify the issue on parking. What is the policy requirement for the numbers of parking slots on this site? We're told that there are 4 been provided, but the requirement is for 6. Is that a desirable number, or is it something that's specific to an adopted policy? Thank you.
Would you like to take that on?
Hi members, I'm Lee Smith from the Pool Office, Senior Development Management Officer, dealing with the highways aspects of planning applications, just for those who don't know me. The Council's the standard for this area is the Dorset Residential Parking Standard. It would require for this development 5 residential spaces and 1 visitor space. The report does refer to 4 spaces. In the case officer's defence, the Dorset County Council, who are currently doing the comments on the application, did say no objections. So I think the officers assumed it complied with guidance. Perhaps what it should have said was there's no minimum standard. It should require 6 spaces. However, at 4 there are no objections from a highways point of view.
Thank you, Chair.
Can I ask you, is there a turning circle within that? Is there adequate turning?
Similar to the previous application, 1 space will involve reversing off the site, but that is an existing situation for the existing property. The other 3 parking spaces will have appropriate turning to the rear. They have got 6 metre distance before you get to the space. 6 metres is the standard. So 3 spaces have the turning, 1 doesn't, but the one that doesn't is similar to the existing situation.
Thank you. Councillor Stribley.
I beg your pardon, sorry about that. So I think it's out of character with the area. It's overbearing on number 17. It's overbearing, unneighbourly and overshadowing to number 76. There's inadequate parking and the road there, in fact I parked on the verge there in front of this property by the bus stop. The road is exceedingly narrow. There is a junction dead opposite and there is a bend within 10 yards further down the road. There you are, almost adjacent. I caused problems there with other vehicles this morning, as my colleagues could say, and I was parked virtually off the road at that point. The road is too narrow at this point, and the site is too close to the bend and the junction and the bus stop to accept that increased density and reversing onto Grove Road would be acceptable in any circumstances. I find that quite extraordinary. The fact that the bungalow is dilapidated and needs to be repaired or rebuilt is no excuse to cram 3 or 4 dwellings on the site. As a plot value, somebody would buy it and build one house. I agree others may wish to get more out of it than that, but to me it's totally out of character. It doesn't fit anything in the vicinity, and I'm really surprised at the recommendation.
Thank you. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. I had a cursory look at the site today, but again, I parked a little bit further up from it and I was causing a hazard even though I was parked legitimately. I didn't see a problem in visualising a 2-storey building, even a 2-storey with a slight hip to it, but this application seems to be cramming too much on the site. I'm almost tempted to repeat myself on the last discussion and say that, you know, there's one dwelling too many on this, and the idea of having displaced parking from the site onto the road, I think that would become an issue. As I say, I don't think there's any problem with, as I say, having a 2-storey building, and I don't think there's any problem in having more than one dwelling within that 2-storey building. But I think 4 dwellings needing 6 parking spaces, you've already gone over the top. So I think that this needs to be refused, and something more appropriate that doesn't cram the site would be, okay.
Thank you. Any more questions or comments? Councillor Davies?
Thank you, Chairman. The advice that the policy officer provided basically confirms that there is no objection to the development itself because it's outside of the immediate flood risk area. The rear part of the garden, as you've seen from the plans, does drop away, and that is the area that's subject to the flood risk. But the built form, the development itself, is outside of the flood risk area. Thank you.
Councillor Hall.
I don't want to talk about the plan, but I am very disappointed in the office report. When we get so many alterations, surely to goodness we get those in writing. Just have them verbally. I don't do shorthand, so I couldn't get them all down. But in future, could we have, when there's so many different alterations to the scheme, we should have that in writing, please.
Can we look to do that moving forward? Yeah.
Thank you, Chair. That's noted. Apologies in this instance.
Does anybody else wish to say anything before we go to the vote? Councillor, excuse me, Councillor Barron.
Thank you, Chair. Could the planning officer let me know what kind of TPO is on the site? And I presume the tree officer isn't here today. So I'm just unsure as to which trees are going to be lost. Thank you.
Thank you, Chairman. There are no preserved trees that will be lost by the development. As I indicated, that tree on the adjacent land is dead. All this area here is vegetation. The trees are predominantly at the rear of the site, apart from this oak tree at the front of the site. Yeah, so there's preserved trees in the bottom end of the garden, but the site itself around here has no preserved trees apart from this oak tree at the front.
Thank you. Councillor Brooke.
Sorry, you hadn't finished.
Sorry,
You didn't really answer my question. What sort of order is it? And is the dead birch protected? And if it's protected, it should be replaced. Thank you.
I'm afraid I don't have that information at hand. The birch isn't on the application site itself, it's on the adjacent property.
Chairman, I may be able to check that, but if you can give me a couple of minutes, I'll hopefully be able to clarify if it's an individual tree or a preservation order. I just need to log into the system. Thank you.
Thank you. Meanwhile, if Councillor Brooke, would you like to come in?
Fine, thank you, Chair. I don't have specific problems with the design of the building that is being presented. It does look like a relatively large house adjacent to a larger property. Its location northeast of the bungalow at 72 means that despite the comments that were made, the overshadowing and the loss of light is going to be minimal. I do accept that there is likely to be some loss of light against number 76, but it is, according to the report anyway, secondary windows, and I understand that that therefore is not a significant issue. I do, however, have concerns over the car parking, and despite the county having said that they have no issues with being the number being below the stated policy, I think the location of the property against the junction with Elm Avenue and the need for at least one of those cars to reverse out is actually unsafe and should therefore be addressed. I don't think it would be an issue further on in the road, but in that particular location, I think it is a serious issue and one that needs to be taken into consideration more than at present. Thank you.
Chairman, I can answer Councillor Barron's query about the tree preservation order. I've been able to access the records. If you just go to the wider location plan, Kevin. Yes, the advice that you were given is correct in that, in effect, there's a line across the back of the site where there is an area of preservation order, and in effect, to the southeast of that, towards the road, there isn't a preservation order. So there's an area order at the rear, and then there's a series of individual TPOs within number 76 to the north, which would include the tree on the boundary, which is close to where the proposed bin store is. My understanding is that, notwithstanding the issue that tree may be dead, the design of the bin store is done as a no-dig solution, so it doesn't require the removal of the tree. If at some point the occupier owner of 76 proposes to remove that tree, then in the normal scheme of things, we would look for a replacement to replace the amenity lost by the removal of a preserved tree. Hope that helps.
Thank you. Does that answer your point?
I just would have expected a tree survey that would clearly say that, you know, which trees are to be retained, where the protection is going to go, and that sort of thing. Because there's trees listed off, you know, in the front here, and I've tried to zoom in on my phone. It's so the type's so small I can't see what it says. But I don't think it says to be retained or to be felled. So it's just wanted to clarify that really. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Can we pass it on to the tree officer?
Yes.
Arboriculturist. Okay, we go to a move then. Does anybody want to propose? Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. I understand the issues around the bulk of this building and the fact that it's located next to a bungalow at room 70. Sorry, 72. But of course, the MPPF says that you should make decisions with a presumption in favour of development unless there's a material harm. So I'm really thinking about specifically what harm would be the outcome of this development. And to me, that harm comes quite clearly from the issue around parking, which is actually 50% below the standard that is required to meet, coupled with that shortfall against the agreed standard and its location on adjacent to the bend and the opposite junction. I would move to refuse this application on that basis as being contrary to policy KS12 parking provision.
Do we have a seconder for that motion? Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chairman. I would also say that there is an impact to amenity to neighbouring properties, both light and overlook. So it wouldn't just be refusal on the parking. I think we need the amenity to be a material as well.
Councillor Stribley, did you?
Yeah, Chairman, I accept that. I never suggested there was any loss of light to number 72, but they will have a two-storey building looking down on their conservatory and rear garden, and it will take light from the rear garden of number 76. So I believe it's overbearing to 72 and overbearing and unneighbourly on 76, and I would like to see that included in the reasons for refusal.
Councillor Bartlett.
Chair, I can't agree with the amendment to my move. Therefore, I will withdraw my move and ask that someone else makes that move.
I will propose it plus Councillor Bartlett's reasons for inadequate parking, if that's acceptable.
Okay, and Councillor Hilliard.
I would second that. Thank you.
Yes, Chair. There's just a couple of issues of clarification, if we could. In the move, there was reference to the overbearing impacts, and just to be clear, that's to 72 and 76.
It's overbearing and unneighbourly to 70. It's overbearing on both, but okay. It's also, I believe, unneighbourly and overshadowing to number 76.
And in terms of the unneighbourly aspects, could you clarify that in terms of does that because an overbearing issue is an unneighbourly aspect?
Well,
is there a privacy issue as well you're concerned with?
With the development itself, I'm concerned at the middle one. I mean, they're looking sideways onto developments. They don't have a normal aspect at all. There are bedroom windows that look out, but to me, it's quite extraordinary, and we will see little terraces stuck down between all buildings if this one goes forward.
Is the concern about a loss of privacy to the properties,
yes.
and would that apply to 72 and 76 for benefit as a reason for refusal? Is the loss of privacy simply to the property to the north, or
no,
is it to the south as well?
There are windows overlooking No, the property is 76 is the one that loses its privacy.
Okay.
I think 72 is just gets overbearing.
Thank you. And the other issue, there is a move to refuse on the lack of parking grounds, and you
Yeah.
have heard from the highways officer that, notwithstanding that the proposal is below the standard, they do not have an objection on highway safety grounds. So the council will have a difficulty in defending that if it can't articulate what the harm to highway safety will be. The MPPF is pretty clear on this issue about, and I'll just read the relevant bit of the MPPF, because it says development should only be prevented or refused on highway grounds if there would be an unacceptable impact on highway safety or the residual cumulative impacts on the road network would be severe. And the MPPF doesn't use that word severe anywhere else in the document, so we do need to have a very strong reason to demonstrate why a possible overspill onto the Grove might be would result in a harm that is unacceptable in terms of highway safety when you don't have that assessment from your relevant engineers. Thank you.
Chairman, with respect, I don't necessarily think the highways officers are always accurate. They might be going by the rules, but I think anybody who's been there and seen it will know how difficult and dangerous that is because of the narrowness of Grove Road. And when I get a redevelopment of a property, I accept that that's fine, you are limited with your parking and you're making the best use of an existing property. Here you have a demolition and a clear site, so to me there is no excuse for substandard parking.
It would be helpful if...
I'll just bring in the highways officer before we go to Councillor Bartlett.
I'll just clarify one reason in terms of the overspill parking issue is that a lot of people talk about parking on the Grove when actually Elm Avenue is directly opposite and there is a particular length of on-street parking available on Elm Avenue. So in terms of the highways officer's consideration of where the overspill parking would take place, one thought wasn't just the Grove, it was Elm Avenue as well, and I'll just leave that with you.
Councillor Bartlett.
I'd just like to come back on the parking issue. I thought I'd made it absolutely clear about what the objection was. The policy that applied, KS12, is significantly below the standard required, 50% below the standard required. That coupled with the location of the site being on a bend and also opposite a junction, I don't think I can get any clearer than that in terms of expressing my objection. I would also say difficult to defend. I don't think that it is difficult to defend given that we are so short against the standard that we're required. You know, it's for an appeal to decide whether it's appropriate or not. In terms of substantiating the objection, I think I've been quite clear on that, and I think the policy supports it. Thank you.
And there's a bus stop on the corner there as well, mate. As well. Councillor Haley, did you want to come in?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, I was going to say about the bus stop, and also the Grove is a main artery road, so quite heavy traffic most parts of the day. So I think all those factors impact road safety.
Okay, we have a motion and it's been seconded, so I should propose going to the vote. All those, do you want to read out the motion? Just for So those in favour of the move, which is to refuse the application, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
That's unanimous. Thank you, gentlemen. Councillors, if we have a 5-minute break now for a cup of tea or whatever, comfort break. Okay, if we can move on to 83, The Grove, which is actually opposite the last one. Mr. Gillis, do you want to lead on that?
Thank you, Chairman. This proposal is to construct a 2-storey office building in what is currently the car park of the host building. As the Chairman said, the site is actually opposite the last site we were looking at. This is the Grove again, Barrett Road here and Fairmile Road there. The property is on the corner of Elm Avenue and the Grove, and the proposed building is located at the end of the site. As I say, it's currently car park, and the application includes the provision of 5 parking spaces plus some cycle storage there. The application involves a building that provides shower facilities and meeting room and general storage facilities on ground floor. It's a 2-storey building with no windows apart from a ground floor one facing to Elm Avenue. On the elevation facing the car park, you've got 2 windows at first floor level and a door and a window at ground floor level. In the street scene, the closest property to Elm Avenue is a bungalow that benefits from accommodation in the roof space. It's got a gabled element projecting forward into the street scene and a gabled element facing the site. There's a separation distance with a driveway coming down here. The elevation of the proposed building fronting the street scene would be partially screened with an existing hedge here, and the upper storey has wooden slatted louvers in front of the upper storey windows. The host building is a detached building with a pyramidal roof form. You can see the hedgerows on the front of the site. That building down there is 2 Elm Avenue. You can see on the facing elevation there's a window at first floor level, and there's also a window in the facing roof slope. In the street scene, the proposed building would sit slightly forward of this gabled elevation, approximately a metre forward. So in this perspective you'd see it in this elevation here. Across the road, 1 Elm Avenue is a 2-storey semi-detached property. Number 81 The Grove is a detached 2-storey property with a rear extension. Looking out of the windows of 2 Elm Avenue, that's the host property. This is the car parking area. The common boundary with 2 Elm Avenue is marked by a wall with fencing on top. To the rear of the application site, number 85 is a 1.5-storey detached property, and there's a hedge at the rear of the site on the common boundary with that property. When looking at it from number 2 Elm Avenue, you would see the proposed building projecting slightly forward here. This is the side window in the front bay. This is a ground floor bathroom window in the facing elevation of number 2, and in the rear garden of number 2 you would see the roof of the building in this location here. The application is recommended for approval. There's no objection from the highways officer, and is considered to be an appropriate development in this location. Thank you.
Thank you. Where are we? Mr. Wild speaking on behalf of the applicant.
Thank you, Chairman, Councillors. My name is Tom Wild. I am here from Ken Park Planning Consultants, speaking on behalf of the applicant, Elcock Associates, today. I wanted to provide a little bit of context to the application, but ultimately to support the recommendation which is before you for the grant of planning permission, and ultimately invite you to do just that and grant planning permission. This application is made by Elcock Associates in response to a general need for additional accommodation. Elcock Associates is a growing local company that occupies number 83 and has effectively outgrowing those premises. And has identified a need for additional floor space and accommodation to meet its ongoing business needs. The company is one that provides high quality jobs as a firm of chartered surveyors, and this, as I've said, would simply provide more space to allow that continued growth. As you will have read in the case officer's report, that additional benefit is judged to be a significant benefit in the planning balance. In terms of the principle of the development, it's been assessed as being acceptable. The site is clearly within the urban area, in a location where there's no restriction on the provision of this type of development. It's in a very sustainable location, both within the town and on a bus route, and the character of the development has been deemed appropriate. It's in an area of mixed character and mixed scale of buildings, as you can see from the photos that have been displayed on the screen. While there are bungalows next door, there are also two-storey buildings in the vicinity, and the building is designed with 2 stories of accommodation but with reduced eaves, so in a sense mediates between the single-storey and 2-storey scale of development. You will have seen there have been some objections, particularly in respect of the highways impact, and we've clearly debated that at length in the previous application. The scheme does provide 5 on-site parking spaces with additional cycle parking, and also shower facilities which would help to support sustainable travel choices. It's worth noting at this point that the company's several of the company's staff already live within walking distance of the office, and walk to work whenever possible. And the company has actually also recently invested in a pool car, which allows those employees and others who want to make those more sustainable transport choices to do so, safe in the knowledge that they will still be able to make site visits, go to off-site meetings, which is quite a large part of the job of this type of work. It's also, finally, just on that point, worth noting the historic use of the site as a doctor's surgery is quite an intensive use of the site in terms of its traffic impact. Not only would the doctor's surgery have had employees and the doctors, nurses, etc., but there was also patients visiting for appointments throughout the day. This is a mode of use which clearly doesn't happen in the same way for an office type of use. The recommendation before you is that planning permission be granted. I fully support that recommendation. There are a number of conditions set out which the applicant considers reasonable, although they would make one request specifically in relation to the condition relating to the hours of working. It's been suggested that there's a limitation just to weekday working. They've suggested if the committee deems it acceptable to have some flexibility built into that to allow for occasional weekend working when workloads are of a higher nature. But ultimately, as I said, the recommendation is for planning permission to be granted, and I simply request that you do so. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Phipps, do you want to talk?
Me again, got 2 in my ward today. Okay, I think you know who I am. So I've basically been contacted by the resident of number 2 Elm Avenue, which is up there. which is the property immediately alongside the development. She is away on holiday at the moment and unfortunately can't be here to speak to you personally, but she has asked me to express her extreme concern about the impact this proposal will have on her family's quality of life. And you will also see from the report that there are 19, it states in the report, local resident objections. Personally, I have to say I find this application a little worrying. The property is on the corner of Elm Avenue and the Grove. Number 83 is the property there. It was the doctor's surgery before it moved to Christchurch Hospital. And it's actually built in the style of a house, and it's completely in keeping with the rest of the Grove and the area. The proposed development, which would, I suppose, really, you could equate it to what would be the house's garden in a way, although it's been the car park for the surgery, is a small car park. And it says in the report it has 8 spaces. I believe in the planning permission it was given, it had 10, but anyway. But it's pretty small, and I know it was my doctor's surgery, and I've parked in there. Very difficult to get in and out, impossible for a large vehicle like a 4-wheel drive. So this is on a small parking area where you're going for a development of a 2-storey office building is proposed, including 5 parking spaces. So knowing the site, this looks to me as though you will not be able to turn around once you've parked in there, and you will have to reverse out. And this is right by the junction of the Grove and Elm Avenue, and it could give, the terminology I heard on the last one, a non-acceptable impact on highway safety. So I'll throw that one in. Yet again, as the last one, the character of the area is described in the Christchurch Borough-wide assessment as being a leafy suburban and a sylvan character. And it acknowledges it's sensitive to enlargement and infill. And paragraph 127 of the MPPF requires development should add to the quality of the area. This proposal is, in my view, the equivalent of building in the small garden of an existing house, which was the doctor's surgery. And it not only does it double the employment on the site, but it reduces the parking, and I consider it to be overdevelopment of the plot. Parking in Elm Avenue is already very difficult, and this will make it worse, there's no doubt, because there won't be enough parking for everything. It's not the town centre, it might be near a bus stop, but people will use their cars to get to work, and I just suggest it's perhaps not the right location for this business. There's going to be a huge impact on the amenities of 2 Elm Avenue. The office building will be 1 metre in front of the building line of houses in Elm Avenue, projecting forwards of number 2, right on its boundary. And the owner has asked me to read you her concerns. This development personally affects my family because of its close proximity to my boundary. It will be overbearing and cast shadow over 5 regularly used rooms. The materials on the roof are likely to cause noise issues to 3 of my bedrooms. One of my rooms directly nearest to the proposed building is used as a craft room and requires light. It will be overshadowed. She says planning conditions were placed on the original grant for the surgery, and she does give the application number. And the grant notice clearly states the reasons for the conditions, and the relevant ones are to ensure the provision of adequate off-street parking within the site in the interests of highway safety, and the LPA considers that the erection of any additional development on this site whilst the existing building remains would result in an undesirable and congested form of development. And that's what the resident number 2 has asked me to tell you. So I wonder what's changed. The principle still applies, and I still believe this is overdevelopment. I'm asking the planning board to refuse it as set out in the report, because I was the one that called it in, and it's under the reason for referral to committee, being contrary to the SAVE policy H12 of the local plan, policy H2E2 of the core strategy, out of keeping with properties in the area, overlooking and overshadowing to 2 Elm Avenue, spoiling enjoyment of their home, in front of the building line of other properties in Elm Avenue, making it overbearing in that location, overdevelopment of the plot, and I believe it's contrary to paragraph 127 of the MPPF as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Do you want to come back on that?
Thank you, Chairman. In terms of the issue of overlooking of number 2, which is this property here, the facing elevation of the proposed building has a ground floor window, which you wouldn't be able to see number 2 from because of the boundary treatment. The rear elevation, which would face number 2's garden, has no first floor windows in the elevation. I don't believe that we would be able to sustain a refusal reason on the overlooking of number 2.
Thank you. Mr. Smith, oh, sorry.
Yeah, just in terms of vehicle manoeuvring, there was reference to reversing out to the side. I just clarify that the parking spaces have the minimum 6 metre distance behind. In fact, most of the spaces have more than 6 metres minimum manoeuvring distance behind to assist with being able to drive into the space, reverse and then come out to the site in a forward gear.
Thank you. Councillor Trent.
Thank you, Chair. I would dispute the manoeuvring distance for vehicles there. Whilst I can see the first 4 vehicles being able to turn and go out forwards, the vehicle at the top of the slide, quite frankly, would have to reverse back out of the site. And if that was me, then you'd be in serious trouble. but to me, I had a look at the site this morning. I think there were either 3 or 4 vehicles on site. There was probably room for another couple of vehicles on site. The street was pretty much fully parked up at that end. But it seems to me that the existing bungalow could be, the roof could be redesigned to put in the additional workspace without putting a building on site, because quite frankly, if you put an additional building on site, you reduce the manoeuvrability and the availability of car parking spaces, and you create a hazard. And quite frankly, you would not want to reverse out onto something which is right on a junction. And so I find that from the parking point of view, it's unacceptable. And it's not as if there isn't an alternative which would at least preserve the on-site parking. So again, I just don't find this an acceptable development, and it is the lack of easily manoeuvrable parking that is the problem, and the lack of overspill on-street parking.
Thank you. Thank you. We are, of course, looking at the application in front of us, not what could potentially be, but yeah. Councillor Stribley.
I thought Councillor Neil was first. Sure. Okay. I largely agree with Councillor Trent, but sorry, I keep forgetting to put that on. I'm too good at shouting without one, I guess. We're told that this has come forward because the applicants who use the main building need more accommodation. Well, I would challenge that, because there are 2 businesses there now, and if they need more accommodation, why have they let part of it out to another business? There's chiropractor and sports injury and whatever else happens on the site. It's also not an application for a building with 5 parking spaces. It's an application for a building and remove 5 parking spaces, because the doctor's surgery, which it was and has been converted since then, had permission for 10 parking spaces. And the existing building, which has a flourishing business in it, we hear, and in fact 2 businesses in it, if you look at the signs at the front, which both look prosperous and flourishing, obviously have staff, and they obviously have clients. And if you've got staff coming and going all the time, you've got clients arriving, especially when you need your back rubbed or whatever else you get in the chiropractor area. The 10 parking spaces, I would imagine, are pretty fully used. The other points raised, both by the ward councillor and the residents, Overdevelopment of site, yes, I agree with. Detrimental impact on the character and appearance of the area. Yes, this looks like an industrial building in a very pleasant residential street with bungalows, detached and semi-detached properties. Overbearing scale and design, yes, it's higher, it's close to the neighbouring property and it's forward of the building line. Inappropriate choice of materials, loss of parking spaces. So we're not giving 5 parking spaces to this building, we're losing 5 parking spaces from the other property, which actually probably needs all 10. Intensification of business use in a residential area, a precedent for other non-residential uses, and so on. Concerns about arrangements of refuse collection. I can't imagine why it's even got this close to committee. I cannot understand the recommendation, and I certainly wouldn't be voting for it, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor O'Neill.
Councillor Stribley did a good job there, because most of those questions I was going to ask. I wanted clarification on the number of employees currently on site between Elcox and the other business or businesses. And I'm trying to relate that then to parking, because in one part of the report it says 8, and another part, I think page 92, it said 10.
Yeah.
Chair, I believe it's in the report. I just find it that on the application form it says 5 existing employees, and then that the proposed number of employees is 12. And you'll see from the report that we've given significant weight to the economic benefits of that in the planning balance.
Right. The only other point I would add is that when one looks at the surrounding properties, this design is out of character and actually indicates an overbuilding of the plot size. If that was a bungalow going in there, you wouldn't approve it. So I am worried about the building. I think it's out of character with the street scene, and it is inconsiderate to those around it. And indeed, on the chart earlier that showed the profiles, it was interesting to note that's the one that the wall is very close to the proposed development and a long way from the bungalow next door. I've seen that building twice, and that gives a misleading impression.
Yes.
It is too close. It is an overdevelopment.
Councillor Hall.
Thank you, Chairman. Well, I agree with everything that's been said. I think it is overdevelopment, but also, which does concern me, the number of parking spaces again, and also the dimension you've got. When we had a last Christchurch planning meeting, the officer said we needed 3 metres. Now, if you've got anyone that's disabled, you're discriminating because you're not letting enough space for any disabled parking there. So, but apart from the overdevelopment and the fact that it's going to come over the building line, we've got policy H12 and HE2. We've got plenty of reason to refuse it, and I propose it's refused. Thank you.
Before I address that, can I just ask Mr. Smith about the parking there, the disabled parking?
Yeah, in terms of the parking spaces, the parking space widths meet the standard dimensions available. In terms of disabled parking, given the relative small size of units, we don't have a minimum standard we would seek, or minimum number of spaces for this type of development. There is a disabled ramp access to the building there, so there is a possibility of parking in the first parking space and going around using the ramp, but given the small scale of development, we wouldn't necessarily insist on a dedicated disabled parking bay.
Are there any more comments or questions before I deal with the move? No. Do we have a seconder for that move? Councillor Stribley.
Chairman, so in terms of what would be helpful is we've heard a lot of different reasons, planning material reasons for the objection. In order to give us a defensible position, it would be helpful if we can narrow those down into the precise harm and the actual impact. So, in terms, if I was correct in terms of what I heard, the reference was made to the overdevelopment of the site, and a design of building out a keeping out a character. Sorry, increase it. I think the challenge to that is that that's an existing use and it's got planning permission, and the council needs to show that it has balanced the environmental, social and economic factors. So as part of the recommendation, we need to show that the economic benefits of the scheme, which is increased employment in a sustainable urban area, is outweighed by that harm. So the decision of the committee needs to show that it's given due weight to that economic benefit, but it's outweighed in this particular instance by those detrimental environmental effects. So I just want to put that in your mind that we're clear on that particular issue. In terms of the parking issue, you've heard from my colleague that the arrangement in terms of reversing out onto the street is acceptable, but in terms of an under provision of parking, and gleaning that is a reason for refusal as well, and we would treat that as a separate reason, that the lack of parking provided for the business use. And finally, I just wanted to clarify that harm is alleged in relation to the adjacent property on Elm Grove, and that's an overbearing impact.
The residential properties are there, it's going to have a detrimental impact on them.
Thank you, Councillor.
Those there.
Yeah. So that's an overbearing impact due to its proximity. And
completely out of keeping.
Councillor Barron.
Just like to bring to, thank you, Chair. I'd just like to bring to everybody's attention that the plan up there is slightly misleading, and I understand it's the front elevation of the neighbours, but the neighbour's property is actually at an angle, so towards the rear of the neighbour's property, it is actually going to be a lot closer than that that elevation suggests. Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you. Okay, so we've got a move on the table. We've got a seconder. We'll go to the vote. The move is to refuse the application. So all those in favour?
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12.
Thank you. That's unanimous. So. Okay, the next application is 7G, 2 Watermead, Willow Way. And Sophie Maudsley will lead on this one.
Thank you, Chairman. Okay, this application is for a replacement single-storey dwelling with an attached carport and raised deck to the south. It's an amended scheme from a previous application in 2016. Members will have seen in the report that this application has been resolved to be approved by the previous planning committee. However, it's not been possible to secure the legal agreement as set out in that committee report, and therefore the application is back before committee for determination, but it's still recommended for approval. This is the location site. You can see it outlined in red, and the aerial photograph showing a bit more detail. And this is the previous property that was on site. From the photographs you'll see no longer is there. In terms of the wider context, you can see the river south of the slide. This is the application site here, adjacent to the river. This is Twynham School, and the Quamps and the town centre is in this direction. Okay, this is the ground floor plan and the site plan of the site. The main changes from the originally approved application involve a reduction in the size of the carport, which I'm not sure if you can see, but it's the blue line, which I'm going around here. And the proposed carport is this black structure at this point here. Also, there's an extension to the rear terrace running along the eastern boundary, which is this section at the top. Okay, the front of the site, just a little bit more detail. There are differences in the ground level between Watermead here and as you enter the site, and it does increase. As outlined in paragraph 3.01 of the original report, which is an addendum to the current committee report, the ground rises from the front gates up by 0.6 metres to the parking area. At the bottom there's a photograph taken from the rooftop looking back towards number 5, which is this dwelling here. There's no proposed use of this rooftop, and condition 8 in the report will restrict this use. Okay, this is just the front north elevation of the property, and these photos were taken this week. As you can see, the property is under construction, and this is the revised carport, which you can see in the plans. At the top photograph, this is the adjacent bungalow to the east, and this building here, which you can just see on the edge, is number 5 Watermead, and there will be gates installed within this where the van is there. This is the rear elevation, and you can see the terrace under construction. And this element here along this eastern side is the extension from the originally approved plans. These show the elevations, particularly of the carport. The blue line you can see indicates the originally approved carport and what was under construction. And this is the new proposed carport, which from the photographs you can see is now on site. It was 4.2 metres high at this point, and it's now 3 metres high from ground level. Okay, this is the cross-section looking back towards number 5, and you can see the balcony. Again, this blue line shows what the carport at the height it was, and the revised height of the structure. It's clear that the changes to the scheme have considerably improve the situation for number 5 and the outlook from that balcony. So these top photographs are taken for the March Planning Committee. I stood on the balcony of number 5 looking onto the application site, and you can see the height of the balcony and the impact that this would have on number 5. This lower photographs was taken this week. The new carport, this one has been removed, and the new carport at the lower height is under construction. Again, just showing the side elevations of the new dwelling. It's proposed to put a 1.6 metre high obscure screen along this element to protect the amenities of the next door neighbour. And also we've suggested a condition for a new hedge to be planted along this boundary to add further privacy. This is showing a little bit more detail the extended terrace area, and this is the access door from the bedroom. So there'll be obscure glazing from this door out towards the back terrace, and a new hedge planted along this side. This photograph's taken, I say, in March, and this is the current situation on site. Obviously, the hedging has not been planted up yet, but it is controlled by condition. The site does lie in flood zones 2 and 3. The finished floor level was set at 2.24 AOD, and this was already granted planning permission with the original approval. The plans also show the use of eco drains and a soakaway at the front of the site, and new drains which will lead directly into the river. Further to comments from our drainage engineer, further details are required, and these are secured by condition 9 in the report. This proposal is considered to be an improvement from the previous permission, and whilst we do not have a legal agreement and to prevent the previous scheme being built out, it's considered there's no planning reasons for refusing this planning application. Given the works undertaken on site and the revised carport being partially constructed, it's clear that the applicant is willing to undertake these changes. Therefore, the application is recommended for approval as set out in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We've got people speaking for and against this application. If we can start with Melvin. Sorry, I'm looking at the wrong one. Sorry, we can start with the applicant, Sandra Graham, from Trethunwell.
Good afternoon, Chairman, members of the committee. My name is Sandra Graham from Trethunwell Solicitors. I represent the applicant in this matter. I was not proposing to address you fully as a formal representation to this particular application, but took the opportunity really to put myself forward if there were any inquiries in this connection, purely to say that the original application to which your planning officer referred to was approved in 2016, and building works commenced in accordance with that planning consent. And it was only when the building was half built that it was realised that there was an impact on a rear neighbour. And to be fair, the planning officer came to the site and measured the site and all the works that had taken place, and it was confirmed that all the works were in accordance with the planning approval that had been granted by the council. However, the applicant clearly, he'd relied on an architect to draft the plans for him, but clearly he felt that it wasn't fair to a neighbour to have the building in the format that had been approved, and the council indeed were not happy with the effect on the neighbour. So the applicant was willing to enter into discussions both with the council with a view to trying to appease the neighbour and make life better basically for the neighbour's amenities, as a result of which he has voluntarily put in another application for planning for a lower carport, which is the main issue, to lower the carport. The new planning application does, as you've seen, include a terrace that's just quite narrow at the side of the premises. The front terrace already existed in the current planning consent. And accordingly, this new application was submitted and came before the March committee of what was then Christchurch Borough Council, and was approved with the conditions that are now before you today, approved in principle, subject to a unilateral undertaking. And it's only since March that we've looked at the unilateral undertaking, and I think it's been felt all round that it is inappropriate for this particular proposal. Usually a unilateral undertaking is submitted to allow a planning application to be accepted when it would otherwise be unacceptable development. And in this particular case, everyone wants to encourage this development to go forward rather than the one which the current planning consent has already approved. And as I say, it's the applicant's real process in trying to accommodate the wishes of the neighbours and the council in putting forward a better scheme than that was previously already approved and in the process of being built. So that really, sir, is the purpose of me coming here today. I'm happy to address you further on legal issues of unilateral undertakings if you so wish, but I hope you'll all consider that this is a better proposal than that for which planning consent has already been granted. Thank you.
If I can bring in Mr. Hodges first.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I just thought it'd be helpful for a little bit of clarification, as this is a slightly unusual situation. The former Christchurch Borough Council Planning Committee did resolve to approve this application subject to legal agreement as set out in the report. And the purpose of that legal agreement was in effect to give up the original consent and agree not to implement that because it had become apparent the level of harm that would accrue from if that application were implemented, particularly in relation to this carport. Despite our best efforts to secure that agreement since March, we haven't been able to do that. Nonetheless, we've still got a planning application that's outstanding and we need to determine it either way. You'll see that we set out in the report quite deliberately, and you've had clarity from the agent solicitor, the issue about when an undertaking or a Section 106 agreement is appropriate in relation to a planning application, and the test, as set out in the report, one of the tests being in order to make an otherwise unacceptable development acceptable. If we can't, and we haven't been able to complete the legal agreement in this particular instance, is this proposal acceptable on its merits? Now, you'll see from the report, our conclusion is this is an improvement over a permission that was previously granted, and we're fairly clear that as the original application was implemented, the applicant does have a fallback position. So in terms of the merits of this application, it's an improvement, it's better. We commend it to you for those reasons. And notwithstanding, we don't have the particular security of the legal agreement that the fallback position would not be implemented. On its merits, this application is still acceptable. And as you'll have seen from the evidence, the applicant would appear to have no interest in implementing the original consent due to themselves recognising the impacts and harm that would have accrued. So we do commend the recommendation to you in this instance, Chairman.
Thank you. Councillor Hall, this is in your ward. Do you want to?
Yes, thank you very much, Chairman. And I will support the recommendation on the report. But what I would like to clarify is, first of all, the original one was delegated. So it wasn't anything to do with members. When it came to Christchurch Council, that was when we got involved because it was the height of the carport. And really, it's only the consideration of the applicant, Mr. Kim Slater, that we got that done. But really, we've had over the years, and I've been on Christchurch Council 24 years, we had lots of applications for development along the riverbank. If the existing property was down for demolition, it was refused. I don't know why on earth this one wasn't. Also, what I don't understand, when we challenged this, why was it passed with such height on the carport, the officer apparently gave it to the senior one who approved it at 6 o'clock at night, and her reason was, oh, I just passed it, it was 6 o'clock at night, and that's what happened. Since then, the council must have spent considerable sums of taxpayers' money to get this rectified. And really, without the help of the applicant, we would still have been in quite a pickle with the original one that was passed. And let's make it very clear, it was not members, it was the officers under delegated powers that passed that, which I think is wrong. And really, on such a site, we should have had that coming to the committee. But I will support this because it does make sense that we're clearing up the legal side, so I will propose as set out. But I would like to know sometime why we have a policy for many years that you cannot demolish a property on that riverbank, and a lot of them have been bought, they've done extensions, which is fine, but they weren't allowed to demolish. So I'd like to know why some of these things happened when they shouldn't have done.
Just briefly, Chairman, there is no policy in the current core strategy preventing the one-for-one replacement of properties on the seafront, riverside, seafront either, within the borough. So they're judged on their merits. What I would say is that we would only generally allow a one-for-one replacement because they're in an area of flood risk. So what we don't want to do is increase the number of properties within the area of flood risk. But currently there isn't a policy preventing an application being an existing dwelling being replaced, provided that its details are acceptable and pass the other policies in the plan.
But I would also like to know, Chairman, exactly how much it's cost this council for the officer's mistake.
That's something that can be done with outside of this committee, not really for now. Councillor Hilliard.
Thank you, Chairman. You're happy to second that proposal?
Councillor Stribley, of course.
Yes, Chairman, I think we need to be very grateful for the applicant's consideration and flexibility on this matter. If the Ombudsman had got hold of this, the preceding council would have egg all over its face, and there would be considerable sums of money involved in compensation. I think that this, again, it's a matter for outside this committee, but I think the council should certainly consider paying the applicants any additional legal costs that have come due to this serious error apparently on behalf of two planning officers. If the first one
Again,
didn't
I don't
measure
think
it and the
that's
second
appropriate
one
for this
didn't check
committee
it.
at this point to discuss.
No, Chairman, that's entirely correct. Yes, thank you.
Okay, so a move's been made and seconded. So all those in favour of the move, please show.
That's unanimous.
Thank you for that. Yes, can you have...
Thank you, committee. Appreciate that.
Okay, the next application is for 7 Elverton Avenue. This is a pool application, and Mr. Evans will take us on this one.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Chairman, 7 Elverton Avenue, proposal, 2-storey side and rear extension. Let me help you first by locating the application site for you. Pool Civic Centre, a short walk beyond the shops, and Elverton Avenue is across the road, with Parkston Road, the A350, at the rear of it. So the orientation of the properties with in Elverton Avenue, on that side of Elverton Avenue, with a southeasterly aspect looking across long gardens across to the rear gardens of homes in Parkston Road. Well, I've got that image in front of you. Can I just draw your attention to where the cursor is? That is a reflection of the existing situation at number 5, Elverton Avenue, where there is a garage. Other drawings include a previously approved extension number 5, which was not built, and therefore that is an accurate representation of the relationship between number 7 and 5. The amendment sheet that was circulated included an alteration to the scheme. This is the only change to the scheme since it was published, which is the omission of this corner of the ground floor terrace to the rear of number 7. On the drawings that I will put on the screen, there's some text. That text is merely annotating features that were already there. They do not change the scheme. So the scheme is exactly the same as it was in your agenda papers, other than that corner of the terrace has now been removed. Chairman, number 7, two-storey detached house, hip roof, rendered elevations. The extension is to the side and to the rear. Just looking at how that sits into the plot, the increase in the width to the side adjacent to number 9 reduces the gap that exists currently with a driveway down the side of number 7, reduces that gap somewhat, leaves about 1 metre beyond the boundary to the side elevation of the adjacent house, number 9. On the other side, retains an existing gap of about 1.5 metres to number 5, so no change in terms of that left-hand side. Turning to the side elevation, this is the elevation towards number 9. If I can just draw your attention to the coloured dotted line, which accurately reflects the side elevation facing number 9 of number 7. So that line there being the existing extent of the two-storey element of the existing house, with the single-storey outshot going beyond that. So everything beyond that point there, this element a two-storey, this element a single-storey, going beyond the existing rear elevation. Put that into context in terms of the overall extensions. Small porch to the front, and this is the side extension with the boundary to number 9, which it closely abuts. You can see down this bottom corner the excluded area of the terrace. So a two-storey side extension wrapping around the rear, two-storey side extension wrapping around the rear, to be a two-storey extension at the rear, projecting slightly further on the ground floor and leaving an area which forms a single-storey flat roof, some of which will be is proposed to be a terrace, and I will return to that. But while I've got this drawing in front of you, let me just draw your attention to the only new first floor windows in the side elevation of the proposals are both 2 bathrooms, or an ensuite and a bathroom, both obscure glazed, and that is that obscure glazing is secured by conditions in the recommendation before you. While I've got that drawing in front of you, can I also just draw your attention to the extent of the first floor terrace? It's not the whole of the flat roofed area, it is just this area. But as I say, I will come back to the question of the terrace in a moment. Moving on to how those alterations and extensions sit within the street scene. Top image is an oblique view down the street with the side elevation of number 7, number 5 in the foreground. You can see the significant setback in number 5 relative to number 7 means that the side elevation is significantly exposed. And you can see that the proposed side elevation, not much different to the existing side elevation, clearly moving 2.4 metre, I believe, closer to than you can see it in that side elevation image. Additional windows, but again highlighting that first floor window, the only additional first floor window, obscure glazed. In terms of oblique views in the other direction, again, this is the gap between number 7 and number 9. It will be filled slightly by the two-storey side extension, but I draw your attention to the character, the typical character within the street, where number 9 is perhaps equally representative as number 5 is, that wider frontage, which of course is wholly in keeping with the proposal, or rather the proposal is wholly in keeping with that. So within the context of the street, the proposals would wholly preserve the existing character. Returning to the terrace, which is at the heart of much of the concern about the proposed alterations, let me just take you through what's involved. A bedroom. Outside of the bedroom, a Juliet balcony. No access out onto the roof, so a Juliet balcony across the full width of the glazed full-height window to that bedroom. The recommendation includes a condition, number 5, condition number 5, which requires that Juliet balcony balustrade to be obscure glazed, effective that being to effectively raise the eye level, raise the sill level to what would be equivalent to a conventional window. So full height, light and air, but an outlook that's only from a conventional sill height upwards. Similarly, so that's that one there. The annotation that I referenced earlier on that you can't really read in this just talks about flat roof for access for maintenance purposes only. It's not intended as a terrace. The area that isn't proposed to be a terrace, something like 2 metres deep, 5.8 metres wide. Just put that into context. That's within a gnat's whisker of being about the same size as a car parking space, to give you an idea of scale in terms of the nature of that terrace. Access solely from one of the bedrooms at first floor level, and again, the 1 metre high balustrade along the rear elevation, again raising the eye level to raising a sill height effectively to 1 metre above the deck of the terrace, again addressed by condition, and therefore significantly reducing any potential impact from that rear terrace. Again, to either side of the terrace, 1.8 metre high, obscure glazed screens to avoid overlooking into, or to reduce overlooking into adjacent properties. So the combination of that level of screening plus the degrees of separation that there are between the proposals and nearby homes of the order of 35 metres to the homes at the rear in Parkson Road, to sensitive areas of the adjoining property at number 5, something of the order of 20 metres into the corner of the garden. I would suggest no worse than existing overlooking as exists between houses in that area. I've highlighted there for your benefit a bedroom window on the adjoining property that has an aspect across the rear of number 7 already. So there is already a degree of overlooking, mutual overlooking between the various homes around that area of garden space. I'd suggest that with the combination of the screens, the design, the separation distance, there would be no significant loss of amenity to any adjacent resident, given the appropriate design, the appropriate character and scale of the proposed extension. I would commend it to you, and the recommendation is that you approve subject to the conditions as set out in the report. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. Okay, we have a number of speakers, Melvin Law and Rosie. You have 5 minutes to share, between you to speak.
Is that on? Yeah. Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Melvin Law, and I'm an immediate neighbour, number 5. I'm speaking on behalf of many residents from Parkson Road and Elton Avenue that have objected to this proposal. In fact, 5 times more objections than any other application in Elton Avenue, according to records. The main objections are due to serious loss of privacy. If you could refer to your précis, please, you'll see photos of the terrace from my bedroom, garden and conservatory, and other properties which clearly show a massive loss of privacy. If we could review them now, the first photo, number 1, is from my bedroom. I dispute the 21 metres that were shown earlier, to be honest, which is approximately 7 metres to the terrace. Centre of my garden, approximately 15 metres, and my patio at the bottom of the garden, approx 19 metres, all clear line of sight, and for my conservatory, approx distance 12 metres. We use the garden and conservatory all year round, and the terrace will have a massive impact on our quality of life. No one likes to be looked down on in their own home and garden. Moving to 99 Parkstone Road, another clear privacy issue. Photo number 5 shows a clear line of sight from their bedrooms to the terrace. The owner, Susan Harvey, has asked me to refute the case officer's statement in a report that she is far away to not have her privacy affected. Obviously, this picture is proof that it is affected, and she's very concerned. I have to ask, on what evidence is a case officer making this wrong assumption that it won't make any difference to the properties to the rear? There are also objections from 97, 95 and 93 Parkson Road due to loss of privacy. Turning to 9 Elton Avenue, the other immediate neighbour, Rosie Sayers, is here today. Photo 6 is taken from Rosie's garden and shows a clear line of sight to the terrace, approximately 10 metres. Reference photos 7, 8 and 9, which is taken from my house, although obviously the terrace will be a lot closer than mine, the photos from my house, could have views as little as 6 metres into Rosie's garden. Photo 9 highlights how the terrace will dominate their garden. The photos give a false indication of screening, as the privacy issues will be made worse in the autumn through to spring, early summer, as the main trees providing privacy from the terrace are weeping willows, which are deciduous. These were planted due to flooding issues at number 7 and number 9, and the garage at number 7 was removed, where the extension is proposed now. During this period, it would afford views into the garden from the terrace of about 90% of their whole garden. Obviously, Rosie's family have to enjoy having people looking down on them when they're in the sanctuary of their garden. The proposed terrace will have a massive impact on the neighbours and will create major privacy issues for my family and other neighbours. This could also lead to disputes amongst neighbours, as no one wants to be looked down on when they're in their own home and garden. Like Councillor Howe, we believe that the case officer's belief that the conditions of adding screening to the side and rear of the terrace would ensure that the proposal would not result in a material loss of privacy is wrong, and my photos clearly prove this. In fact, the terrace we moved approximately 5 metres closer. I believe that the proposed terrace should have been viewed from the vantage point of the existing rear bedroom in number 7, which is representative of the terrace height. This is a key factor. I requested this in my first planning letter, 12th of June, and this was ignored. How can recommendations be made when the best vantage points inside the house haven't been viewed? The terrace was always going to be contentious, as we have no large terraces of this design in this setting in Elton Avenue, Parkstone Road. Number 7 can stand in the windows now and observe neighbours, but it's less likely than them sitting or standing on the proposed terrace and ruining ours and others' neighbours' privacy. Terraces are used to enjoy a view, yet the only view from the proposed terrace, as shown in the photos, is over 20 people's bedroom windows, gardens and conservatories, which begs the question, why have a terrace? The proposer does not add additional housing. It will still be a detached family house. I have shown clear proof that the proposed terrace will have a major impact on mine and other neighbours' privacy, and a loss of privacy to one's home and garden must be a material consideration. In the words of your own colleague, Councillor Howe, this is a loss of privacy that no reasonable person could think is appropriate. Everyone values their privacy, and we are trusting the committee's good judgment to ensure that all of the neighbours in Elton Avenue and Parkstone Road do not have their privacy ruined and they retain their quality of life. This application must be refused as the privacy is not preserved. Thank you.
Thank you. And now we have Oliver and Lucy Fryatt on behalf of, who are the applicants?
Good afternoon. I'm Lucy Fryatt. This is Ollie with the applicants for this proposal. To open, we would like to clarify that we are not property developers, but a local family with young children who are excited to move to 7 Alverton Avenue, which is still within our preferred Longfleet School catchment area, and turn it into our dream home, whilst bringing regeneration to the neighbourhood. That said, I'm proud to say that my husband is an experienced builder, with a reputation for providing a very high standard of work. We initially discussed the plans with our immediate neighbours, and were in the process of considering the points they raised when we discovered a petition had been distributed throughout the neighbourhood containing a variety of misinformation, which in turn created unnecessary concerns. This resulted in several duplicated objections based on a template letter that had also been provided with the petition. We have since discovered from some of the neighbours that considerable pressure was exerted on them by a self-appointed spokesperson who used the template provided and post duplicated objections on the planning portal. Whilst comments supporting our application were dismissed as laughable by the objector and received a personal addressed rebuttal, thankfully many neighbours refused to bow to this pressure, and that includes those directly opposite the front and the rear of our property. Our good name has repeatedly been called into question on the public portal, and this is disappointing to note that the councillor directly responsible for bringing this matter to committee was happy to do so and imply that we were unreasonable without even having met or discussed the plans with us. Given that the individual leading the relentless campaign against our plans had already had planning consent approved for a 2-storey extension of similar dimensions, which reached the boundary of number 7, we were somewhat surprised by the nature of the concerns raised. Nevertheless, we would like to address these as follows.
Clearly number 7 is in much need of improvement both inside and out, and the appearance of the proposed extension has been carefully considered to provide a sleek modern design whilst maintaining the character of the avenue. All proposed features, including the hip roof line and the flat white render, is in keeping with the current properties on the road. We have purposefully stepped back the first floor extension and removed part of the terrace and the patio in order to reduce any loss of light or have an overbearing impact on our neighbours. The disputed timber-clad element viewed from the street scene is very simply the front and storeroom doors. Many properties in Alberton Avenue have already been extended to a similar size, several completely spanning the boundaries, whilst our proposed plan only reaches the boundary to number 9, replicating their extension reaching the boundary to number 11 and so on down the road. The size of the proposal should therefore not be a consideration. It has already been established that there are balconies in the local area, and in fact planning was granted for a substantial rear terrace to number 2 Alberton Avenue several years ago, which has views over number 4's main garden, thus setting a precedent in the immediate vicinity. This application and resulting building work did not provoke an outcry, and rather than creating the threatened disputes between neighbours, it has gone unnoticed in the neighbourhood for 17 years. Despite the repeated unsubstantiated claims that the proposed terrace would overlook a number of neighbours' gardens, this is certainly not the case, and we have provided photographic evidence to support this. In fact, due to the positioning of the properties either side, display will be much reduced. The obscure glazing to the front and side of the proposed balcony will significantly reduce the line of sight from our neighbour's garden into our bedroom and entirely remove the current view to number 5's bedroom window. If sat on the proposed terrace or stood in the bedroom, the line of sight into our neighbour's garden will also be blocked. Therefore, there will be no loss of privacy. Due to the fact that similar extensions and terraces have been approved and erected on the road, we feel that if the application were to go to appeal, we would have a very strong case for approval. As one neighbour on Parkstone Avenue has already pointed out, there are many mature trees and hedges in the vicinity, providing substantial screening and privacy for the surrounding properties. By its very nature, building work creates some disruption, but it is our family home, so rest assured we will endeavour to keep this to a minimum and complete the work as swiftly as possible. To conclude, we respect the right of our neighbours to decorate, renovate or extend their properties as they see fit within planning guidelines, and as we have listened to the concerns raised, addressed them and happily altered our plans to the satisfaction of the planning department, we trust we will be afforded the same courtesy. Thank you for your time.
Thank you, and we also have a written statement from Councillor Howell that Jill will read out for us.
I have called in this application because the proposed terrace represents a major loss of privacy to the occupants of number 5. In her report, the officer recommends the inclusion of a condition to erect a 1.8 metre high obscure glazed privacy screens to the sides of the terrace, together with obscure glazing up to 1 metre high of the balustrade to the rear of the terrace. She says this would ensure that the proposals would not result in any material loss of privacy. As people sitting or standing on the terrace will be able to see directly into 70% of the neighbour's rear garden, the officer appears to consider that loss of privacy to garden areas is not material. However, I disagree. Noise also carries more easily from a height. The large size of the terrace would make it suitable for socialising and therefore increase the risk of disturbance to neighbours. The terrace is out of character with the area, and the granting of permission would set a precedent which would in all likelihood lead to similar applications and further harm to that character.
Thank you. Did you want to come back at all?
Chairman, since a lot of it is clearly hanging on the question of the impact of the terrace, I'm hearing other things. I think the terrace seems to be at the heart of any decision that the committee will make. At the top of my presentation, I talked about the drawings having included an extension next door at number 5, which to my knowledge, to my understanding, has never been built. There was a planning permission given for an extension at number 5, but that has now lapsed and I'm not aware that it was implemented. That permission included a window where I'm indicating with the cursor on the rear elevation, and that suggests that, notwithstanding that it's a terrace rather than to a room, that the combination of the obscure glazed side screens with the obscure glazed end balustrade would mean that the effect of any overlooking from this terrace area, and would be no worse than any overlooking from the existing windows in the rear elevations of any of the adjacent homes. So by raising the eye level to balustrade height, yes, you can stand on the terrace and look beyond the balustrade in the same way as you can stand at the sill of a window and look beyond the window. This would not give rise to any increased overlooking relative to were it a conventional window. Because it's come up, let me just... so the extension next door that was being alluded to, so number 7, the application site, number 5, it was an extension to the side here, and as I say, there would have been a first floor rear window on the rear elevation of that, and I'd suggest that the impact of a terrace would be no greater than a window in the same position because of the degree of screening. I'd therefore conclude, Chairman, that the level of harm arising from the potential for overlooking will be not sufficient to justify refusing it on those grounds. The separation distance, 35 metres to the homes at the rear, well beyond what we would expect in terms of houses facing one another. Something of the order of 21 metres is potentially an acceptable distance for 2 houses to be facing each other, let alone for it to be an aspect across a nearby garden. At 35 metres, there is no view into a room opposite. The effect of reflection on windows and sheer separation distance is such that there would be no significant loss of privacy to those first floor windows you can see opposite. And as you can see yourself, there is very little overlooking of the gardens once you get beyond the bottom of the gardens of Evelson Avenue. There is some overlooking of the adjoining gardens, but as you can see from this photograph, which is taken from the existing bedroom window, there's already overlooking. There's substantial screening on the boundary to number 9, and again the window that I've highlighted, and I think one of the photographs that you have in the pack before you is taken from that window, and it shows that there is as there is in most suburban areas, a significant degree of mutual overlooking already. So that bedroom window has clearly an unimpeded view across the garden number 7. That would be to a large extent got rid of by the screening and the design of the terrace that's proposed. So it would perhaps significantly improve the privacy of people at number 7 in the garden and on the terrace without harming the privacy of number 5 and number 9 or any other adjacent home. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Evans. Members, Councillor Bartlett.
Thank you, Chair. I have no issue with this development other than the terrace. I've just heard the officer say that there is very little difference of looking through a rear window from inside a room as opposed to looking out across a terrace. Well, of course, the two are completely different. The terrace, which is a very large terrace, is designed to be used as a terrace, and you could have a number of people stood on the terrace looking directly out and into the adjacent gardens. Now, I put myself in that position. Would I like that? No, I certainly wouldn't if I lived next door, and I don't think the majority of people, if it were happened to them, would. So I just cannot accept the comparison that because there's been an extension next door and you're viewing through an extension window to the rear is the same. It's a completely different type of thing. When you've got people on a terrace looking down and you can view into a next door neighbour, it's intrusive, and you could have a party on there, you could have dinner on there. You know, it's not the same as looking through a bedroom window from the inside. So, I mean, the owners of the property have made a lot about the pressure and the template and the process they've gone through, allocations of reputation and all the rest of it. Whilst I sympathise with the issues, the one here is materiality, and it's about the ability to look down into the adjacent properties and the effect that they have in loss of privacy through that. And it's unfortunate the development otherwise in bulk size and the rest of it's fine, but I do think that the terrace is just too far.
Do you want to come back again?
Chairman, something the council said, can I just be absolutely clear? The extension next door that I showed you the image of has not been built, just for clarity, because I think the councillor alluded to an extension, so that extension was permitted, but was not built. The planning permission has now lapsed, but clearly it would be a material consideration if another application came in. But I don't believe it was ever commenced. So just for clarity, it has never been built as far as I'm aware.
Yeah, thank you for that clarification. Yeah, well, I think what you were suggesting was, had it been built, it wouldn't have been any different, you know, from looking on the terrace and looking through it, had it been built, and it hasn't been. But there is naturally always going to be, and I just like to cover the other properties at the back, face-to-face separation distances. I agree with you there. Those are far enough away as to not be affected in terms of loss of privacy. But I do think that the adjacent properties are near enough and with a direct line of sight from the terrace looking down into those properties. And I think that's unacceptable for them. It is of real harm to them. So I just couldn't possibly support this application on that basis.
Thank you, Councillor Bartlett. Councillor O'Neill?
Yeah, just to confirm that I've actually visited this location on 2 occasions. I note that entering from the west side of Alveston Avenue, it's largely composed of bungalows to start with, and then quickly moves into houses. The area for approval, e.g. in this area, is noted, with many of the houses having common boundaries, and with many either partially or otherwise overlooking each the other. With some of those, you'd have to hang out the window to do it. The intended development, in my opinion, is entirely appropriate with the necessary screening, and it does not, by design negligence or gross inconsideration, intrusively impact those around. And indeed, it doesn't really look into any of the major rooms, just counting bedrooms, but including family rooms, etc., lounges that are commonly used. And on top of that, there is good distance between this appropriate development and the boundaries at the back of it. So I'm of a mind to support it, and I don't believe it's unreasonable in its application.
Are you making a move to that?
Are you moving that?
Sorry?
Are you moving approval?
Well, if everybody's ready to move to approval, then yes. If anybody seconds it.
Do we have a seconder to that move? Councillor Johnson. Okay, let's go straight to the vote then. Those who are... no, does anybody else want to speak? No? Oh, a couple. Councillor Trent?
Well, I just really wanted to ask a question, because I think the side screening makes any comment about overlooking from there irrelevant. A 1.8 metre screen is quite substantial. I was just actually going to ask about the screening at the back. 1 metre, you can see over 1 metre quite easily, and I wondered whether there was scope to maybe insist on, you know, perhaps another 0.2 of a metre just to, and that would reduce any overlooking quite significantly, whether that would be an acceptable compromise.
Councillor Bartlett?
I'd just like members to consider very carefully this issue, where potentially you have a terrace where there's a party going on, which you could do, barbecue, call it what you like, you know, party, music, with people lined up on the terrace, and that's certainly big enough to accommodate that. If you're living next door, how on earth would you like it when people are looking directly down into your property? And you can, quite clearly you can. You don't have to be at the edges. I accept what you say about the side screening. Of course that would, you know, looking directly at 90 degrees, you're not going to be able to see anything. But if you're looking directly out from the terrace, and if you're stood at the centre, the arc of view is significant. It's a massive. You can see, you know, directly into most of the rear gardens of the adjacent properties. So I ask you to be, you know, think about this very, very carefully.
Councillor Stribley.
Yes, Chairman, this proposed terrace is in effect over part of the kitchen study downstairs. It doesn't protrude out beyond the main building. Sorry, I'll have to get sorted on that. I do understand really the concerns of the neighbours, and the pool planning officers will know I have an absolute thing about floor to ceiling glass windows at first floor level, where you can simply sit in the room and peer out at your neighbours. Whereas if you have a sill, you can go to the window and you look out, but you're not going to do that for more than a moment or two. And when you're sitting in your room, your height is covered by the screen, and if you're sitting on the terrace, your height's covered by the screen, and your view is the distance on the sky. You can't sit on that terrace and look down into the neighbours' gardens. And actually I'm speaking from experience, because I have a balcony of about 4 times that size at my house. It does have solid walls each side of it, but an obscure screen in front. I can stand and peer down in my neighbour's garden, as she can in mine, and you might for 5 seconds in the morning, just to see what state the lawn's in or whatever else is going on, as you do into neighbours' gardens occasionally. But you can't sit there and look down at anybody. You see outwards. In this case, this is a terrace off a bedroom. Downstairs you have a large kitchen, study playroom, all opening onto a ground floor terrace. I can conceive of no circumstances where you'd be having a party or a barbecue up at first floor level in this particular case. Now, if the application were to turn the property into 2 flats, that might be a different issue, but it isn't. This is an application for a family home with 5 bedrooms. I personally would prefer to see the side screen solid, and that would solve the matter entirely, but 1.5 metres is above eye level for anybody bar a giant, I suspect, will cause no sideways overlooking. And yes, you could stand there and look out, but you can stand at an ordinary bedroom window and look out. So personally, I think this would fit into the area, and I couldn't see substantial planning reasons to refuse it, though I do understand the concerns, and none of us like it when people are building next door. I've lived with that for more than 2 years.
Thank you. Councillor Johnson.
Thank you, Chair. It was, I was merely going to say what Councillor Stribley said. I also think that the worry about them throwing large social gatherings on what is a relatively small balcony compared to their quite generous garden, if I were minded to have a large social gathering, I think the garden would be the better place to have it, and I think that any noise coming from there would be no different to that coming from a terrace. And if it became antisocial, there are plenty of steps to be taken to report that to the relevant authorities. So I really think that the worries about that are also slightly reduced by the fact it's a bedroom. When I'm hosting a party, I also don't like to lead guests through my bedroom to the barbecue, so I don't believe it will have such an effect as is being proposed.
Thank you. Do we have any other comments, councillors? Okay, we've got a move proposed and seconded. I suggest we deal with that. So the move was to grant. All those in favour of that move, please show.
1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6.
And all those against?
1, 2, 3, 4.
And those abstaining?
1, 2.
Just to confirm that application's been approved. That concludes the business for this meeting. Would the councillors like to remain behind for a few minutes?
No,